both defendants in court with all lawyers for both sides. There are some matters that were left over from yesterday to discuss. Council have, I think, also some requests to supplement or clarify some of our discussions yesterday. What was it that you wanted in that regard?
Yeah, I think we need a brief report to the screenplay with Dr. Burgess. I believe that as to the Calabasas burglaries, that the alibi portion is not, the court's not going to allow that to be used, but as far as the fact of the burglaries can be used, is that correct?
That's already been ruled upon in relationship to the other witnesses
Right.
testified.
I just wanted to clarify because I don't miss that. I believe the court indicated that I can ask the witness if she considered the report about Mr. Heinberg.
I want to revisit that issue if we could today, Your Honor.
All right. And what else?
And then I don't have any notes on what the court said about whether I can ask her if she was made aware or did in fact conduct any physical examination of the defendant.
I said you could.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
All right. Regarding the Heinberg issue, Ms. Abramson?
Yes, Your Honor, I think that would be improper, an extrinsic use of evidence, not even for impeachment. This witness has indicated that this witness has not testified as a good character witness on behalf of Mr. Menendez. She said she was testifying to behaviors of abused kids. She talked about that as the previous witness did, about acting out behaviors. Therefore, there's nothing to confront her with from the standpoint of, well, have you heard about this act or that act or the other act, because she is not testifying to good character in any sense of the word. And the information from Mr. Heinberg, the people did not present in their case in chief, although they tried to use it to cross-examine a defense witness. It is not evidence of any particular character trait that's an issue here. It's not criminal activity. And the bottom line is there's no relevant purpose for asking this witness if she considered the report of Mr. Menendez's hijinks at 15 and a half, informing any of her opinions or conclusions, because in her opinions and conclusions, she gives room for acting out type behavior. And our jury doesn't know about the Craig Heinberg material because the people didn't put it on in their case in chief and may not have ever been able to. But the point is, they didn't, and therefore to confront her with it as if it were somehow impeaching is improper at this stage. And in order to prove these facts, which they haven't done, they would have to call Mr. Heinberg as a witness. And that particular use of extrinsic evidence, when the defendant had no opportunity to explain it during his examination, because it was obviously they didn't consider it relevant to ask him about it, is simply the wrong use of that kind of evidence. And I think there's no provision in the evidence code that allows them to do that with an expert witness, given the nature of her testimony.
Well, as I understand it, all the prosecution was going to do is ask whether she was aware of it. And when I say it, I mean an incident involving Mr. Heinberg.
Well, but the point
without
is,
anything more. And whether
and if
or not
she says yes,
considered
she's aware of it, then where does it go?
Did you rely on it?
Okay.
And she says no, or yes, and that would be the end of it. And it would be up to some later hearing to determine whether or not it would be admissible to have Mr. Heinberg come in and testify.
Your Honor, would I be permitted to ask her if she said would I be permitted to ask her why she did or did not rely on it?
See, then that gets into the
But
facts.
the defense has put the defendant's mental state at issue through the testimony not only of himself but as an expert. She's testified to his mental state throughout his life, not just on the night of the killing. She's talked about the cumulative effects of fear and how that would cause certain neurobiological responses. And I think I should be entitled to ask her about conduct which is criminal, which would dispute her theory that when he engaged in the behavior on the night of the 20th, that he was reacting to a fear response. I think this lack of consideration would impeach her testimony, as well as the consideration of it should impeach her testimony. And since she has in fact put her they have put his mental state at issue. This goes to his mental state. It's an incident in his life, which is
That's
fairly
ridiculous.
significant. She indicated that she had read all the reports, and if she did not, in fact, read this report, it would mean that she didn't read all the reports and was not given all the information she claims, or the defense claims to have given her. So in that manner, it would also impeach her credibility as a witness.
Well,
Right,
the
you know-
problem I have is that it's unclear to me exactly what happened in the Heinberg situation. The people have one interview, rather sketchy in nature, as I recall, and then the defense has an interview, and we've never had an offer by the prosecution of any detail of what exactly happened. So it's difficult to evaluate this in the abstract without knowing a little bit more about it.
From the report, it's clear that Mr. Menendez went into Mr. Heinberg's residence when he wasn't home and rifled through his wallet and moved around his credit cards. That may not be sufficient to convict him of burglary, but it certainly is a conduct that is inconsistent with someone who is a victim and not somebody who is a
That's
perpetrator.
How does that equate? I don't understand.
Well, people breaking into other people's houses is an antisocial act.
Okay, well, you've got that with the two burglaries.
That's
So
correct,
what
but-
do you accomplish with the Heinberg situation?
Well, Dr. Tyler explained that the two burglaries were acting out, and I think that a third incident, which is like a burglary, is, I think it gets harder and harder to explain his conduct as acting out the more of it that there is, and so it is in fact a cumulative effect. To know what the reports are that she's been given from the defense, and she's been allowed to rely
Well,
on
you're
those.
certainly entitled to find out what they are.
Yes, and I'm certainly I'm going to ask what she was given. But it seems to me that if hearsay reports from the defense are reliable, justifies its reliability. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense.
I agree with you.
All right, so to that end, if she said she's read the report and she hasn't considered it, I think that's probative as to her bias and motive and her mental state in formulating her opinion. She has given very strong opinions about Eric Menendez and his state of mind and his victimization. And I think that those opinions should be tested.
Well, what I'm trying to do is determine how this incident relates to his state of mind on August the 20th. There was certainly good reason for the burglaries to be brought before the trier of fact. And this is another criminal act that you intend to bring before the trier of fact or want to. And there has to be a legal basis for it, not just to test credibility of a witness, but there is obviously strong policy reasons to exclude such evidence unless there is a strong reason for it to be received, and the court has to evaluate it. So what I'm trying to do is ascertain how it relates to the events of August the 20th. I understand that the defense has introduced all sorts of evidence that is far remote from August the 20th, and we've heard a lot of it, and that does not necessarily mean that every criminal act engaged in by the defendants is admissible evidence. The rules are different as far as other crimes evidence. So what I'm trying to do is focus on why this particular event would have significance. It's not an assaultive situation. It's not a situation where the defendant was reacting to physical assault or being aggressive himself, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Correct, aside from the aggression inherent into breaking into a house that is not your own.
Please.
But if the people's theory is correct, Eric Menendez was not reacting to assaultive behavior on the night of the murders either. And people accuse while he's on autopilot.
Well, Your Honor, that's the classic criminal disposition purpose that 1101 forbids. He's a criminal, therefore everything he does is criminally motivated. That's
Well,
what-
certainly this witness is open to attack on her analysis of and description of planning and things of that nature. She's already been cross-examined on that. But how this incident relates to that subject, or more particularly to the subjects that she has most recently described, is unclear to me. And based on the offer of proof made by the prosecution, the court will sustain the objection that it is not sufficiently probative to outweigh its potential for prejudice. No, I've said you can ask whether or not she saw the report and relied upon it. And if in any expert testimony offered by the prosecution, it is a significant factor that your experts relied upon, then maybe it would be admissible. I don't know. I can't. I'd have to hear it. But at this stage, that is the extent of the use of that incident. All right. In regards to the mother's childhood and upbringing, the prosecution was going to attempt to do some investigation yesterday evening regarding the testimony or proposed testimony of a sister of Mary Louise Menendez. Has the prosecution obtained any information in that regard?
Your Honor, Detective Zoller spoke with Milton Anderson, who's I believe, the oldest brother in the family this morning, and obtained some information from him that in part corroborates and in part refutes the proposed testimony of Joan Vandermolen. Mrs. Menendez was age 3. There were incidents where her father beat her mother, and these were witnessed by Mr. Milton Anderson. But after the divorce, those incidents ceased, and that the nature of the relationship, according to Milton Anderson, between his parents was one of contrition in part on the part of the father, but that he is not aware of any beatings after the divorce, after Mrs. Menendez was age 3. And so that was the information we had. I talked to the other brother, Brian Anderson, who didn't have time to really fully discuss things with me, but I would propose that if the court is going to allow in the intergenerational abuse, that the people be permitted to put on full and complete rebuttal when that rebuttal becomes available. In addition, if the court is going to, I would request that I be able to cross-examine about the lack of such abuse in Jose Menendez's family in order to test the theories of the witness.
If the people are going to be able to ask about Jose Menendez's family, then I think the limitation that the court has placed under 352 should be lifted. If the Jose Menendez family story also contributes to the abuse in this family, but in a different way. And so if the people want to ask about abuse in that family, I think we should have a right to show the incredible indulgence and spoiling and catering to that Jose Menendez, which is another way to, there's not just one way to raise an abuser, there's two. And
well, I'd imagine there's all sorts of ways abusers become abusers and not just two. And we can speculate and consider all sorts of things that might or might not have caused somebody to do what somebody did on a particular occasion or over a lifetime. And we could spend years discussing these matters.
But my point simply is that we should be facing that evidence with a limitation. If the people are going to be able to invade that particular area to make their point, we should be able to make our point, I would think.
Well, my recollection is that this witness has testified that she did consider, or that, let me back up, that intergenerational information is significant in an evaluation, and she did consider that in this case. Is that correct? She did so testify.
Yes, Your Honor.
But she didn't go into the detail.
Because you wouldn't let me.
My view is that at this stage of the proceedings, that is the extent of her testimony, and that the expert can state that he or she has relied upon such information without detailing what the information is. And if the cross-examination brings out that information, then it opens the door to the defense bringing out the full basis of her opinion, including the details of it. But at this stage, for her to recite the details is hearsay. And the court is concerned that this would, number one, introduce potential hearsay into the trial. Number two, introduce a whole area that is very much has very much the potential of consuming a great deal of time litigating both the mother and father's childhood and upbringing, and at this point just limiting it to the mother, that this would be an extensive litigation as to what did and what did not occur, disputes as to specific incidents that occurred maybe 40 years ago or longer than that. And that under Section 352 of the Evidence Code, the court would preclude the defense from going into any detail in regards to that at this stage.
Well, if I may be heard for a moment, Your Honor, I do not believe I was permitted to ask this witness whether or not she found evidence of intergenerational abuse in the childhood home of Mary Louise Menendez. Now, I want to be able to ask at least that question. If I don't get into the details, at least show that she did find it and that it did confirm her opinion.
All right, do the people wish to be heard on that request?
Well, if that's going to be asked, I would then ask to cross-examine her whether she found evidence of intergenerational abuse in Jose Menendez's family, and if that fact would change her opinion. And I don't think that should open the door then to details. It seems to me if the defense can ask about the presence of evidence, the prosecution should be able to ask about the absence of evidence without opening the door.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
This in a generic fashion as intergenerational abuse, or however you want to phrase it. It does lend itself to your imagination as to what it means. It could mean anything. It could mean sexual abuse, could mean physical abuse, and it could mean anything, psychological abuse. And that's the potential harm in referring to it in that fashion. And I'm just concerned that we would end up in a trial of events that occurred 40 or more years ago that will be subject to dispute and controversy and just take a lot of time and prove very little.
Well,
And in this context, it doesn't seem like it's proving very much. Listening to the offers of proof yesterday, I just don't find that it is an area of expert testimony that would justify the consumption of time here.
that supports position. I don't think that the area should be asked about at all by anyone anymore. And whatever the state of the record is, it is, and that the defense should not. First of all, asking a question like intergenerational abuse when abuse can encompass 3 separate types is misleading, and that could imply to the jury that it's sexual abuse, that she was sexually abused, and there is no such evidence that she was.
Oh, I can ask a very specific question. Did you find a history of intergenerational physical and psychological abuse in the childhood family of Mary Louise Menendez? And that can be the question. And then we
Okay,
don't
but she
deal
was
with it.
not the one who was abused. And that's misleading that to
She was
paraphrase it that
psychologically
way.
abused, certainly.
Well, but it's much different than what your offer of proof here has been, or your evidence has been as far as the defendants and their upbringing. It's entirely different.
Well, we can
That
call
she just happened to
Dr.
be
F
sitting there and
testify
watching
watching.
watched a few incidents, whatever it is that occurred between her mother and father, and that was it.
No, she also saw incidents between her father and brothers
Okay.
that were violent.
All
And
right.
I mean, there's plenty of research, including that of the prosecution's expert, Dr. F, that there is
Dr. Who?
F, ETH, one of their expert witnesses, that children viewing violence are as affected by it as if it is inflicted upon them. That's another well-established body of trauma research. So, I mean, I think that from the standpoint of the reasons why these intergenerational patterns have significance, the fact that it tends to, the children of such households either tend to personally perpetuate abuse in their own homes or to tolerate it because it was the norm and the model. It doesn't matter if the abuse is inflicted upon them personally, so long as they know it's going on.
All right, let me just say this. I'll go one step further then, in looking at the evidence, listening to it, and reviewing the briefs filed by both sides on the subject, it was more in relationship to the psychiatric or psychological evaluations of the mother, but the issues are pretty much the same as it relates to this. There wasn't a specific brief filed by the parties on this subject, but the brief filed by the parties relating to the mother's therapists really deal with the same subject. This is basically, to a great extent, character evidence that the defense is offering, trying to show that the mother behaved a certain way because of some incidents that occurred in her childhood. And the court finds that this is an improper opinion evidence by the expert that is not appropriate, insufficient basis for it based on the offer of proof. And also under Section 352 of the Evidence Code, the potential for confusion of issues, undue consumption of time, and misleading the jury is such that the court will sustain the objection to its reference at all in the testimony of the witness.
That it is a very remarkable finding for the court to say it's improper opinion evidence when it is a standard inquiry in every examination of family history in the psychological context.
Well, there's no, I'm not talking about what is done in a psychiatric office or in an institution that deals with counseling children who have suffered child abuse. We're talking about evidence in a trial, and it's different. And the different rules apply. And what the defense is trying to do is introduce everything that is used in other forums for other purposes in this trial. And that's the rules are different here, and the evidence code and the court's obligation to apply the rules of evidence to this trial are different than what would occur in a therapy session.
I don't think it has to do with the therapy session, though, Your Honor. It has to do with whether or not in an evaluative process, and that's what this witness's credibility is an issue on, whether she's conducted a professionally adequate evaluation so that her opinions have validity and credibility. And what she is saying, and what Dr. Conti testified to, is that it's a very significant factor in the evaluation process, not in the treatment.
They could say that they considered it, and that's it. They considered the upbringing of the parents or the mother, however you want to phrase it, but don't phrase it along the lines of characterizing it as intergenerational abuse.
Then can I ask, if she considered it, did it support her conclusion?
Just that, and then don't, when you say it, how are you going to phrase it so it doesn't get into
the history of her childhood family.
Okay, and nothing else.
Okay.
And I don't think that opens the door to the father's family and his history, because it doesn't prove or disprove anything. All right, anything else now before we proceed with the jury? Well, there was the issue
yes,
that
the issue that we're concerned.
two things. One was a screenplay, which we can do briefly with testimony since we're going to have that with a witness. And then the other is the people's request to use reference to the book written by Mr. Moniz, or portions of it, during cross-examination of the witness. The court did read those particular portions of the book, and although there are some broad similarities to some features of the defendant's testimony to some of the accounts in that portion of the book, it seems to me that it's very general and not such specific similarities to justify in any fashion reference to that book. There's no showing in any way that that book or its contents in any way has influenced the defendant's testimony or account of the events. So the defense objection to it is sustained.
Inquire about the availability, without going into specifics, of anecdotal literature on the issue of child abuse.
Well, I'm going to
When you say
object to that.
availability, I don't know what
That's
you
what I
mean.
mean. To whom?
I'm talking about that in the last 10 years, there's been a great deal written about child abuse in the literature. I was going to ask her about what the different journals are that have cropped up in the last 10 years, and the fact of that.
Well, I think it's irrelevant if she's going to leave it at that because obviously the people know that the defendants had no access to that material, or they'd be in here with the sheriff's department proving what was in their cells.
Well, it's certainly proper cross-examination of an expert to discuss materials that are available to the experts. I don't know exactly where the prosecution wanted to go with it beyond that. You can certainly cross-examine her on that subject. She has no way of knowing whether any of this was available to the defendant. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm not sure what is the nature of the inquiry we're about to conduct vis-a-vis the screenplay.
There was to be examination as to whether she was aware of it, considered it, and things of that nature. So
And
that
whether
I could
it-
have some basis to determine whether or not it's an area that should in any way be discussed, since it certainly does have the potential of great consumption of time, as we've
Exactly.
discussed before.
I think it falls into the same category, frankly, Your Honor, as the Craig Heinberg material. I mean,
Well,
whether
let me
she-
hear the brief examination of the witness.
Well, let me-
If you would get back on the witness stand, please, just for this. All right, I'll remind you, you're still under oath. Did people wish to inquire? Yes.
Dr. Burgess, in your evaluation of Eric Menendez, you become aware of the fact that he had participated in the authoring of screenplays.
Yes.
Did you ever
No, I did not.
you talked about the suicide note, Mrs. Menendez is referring to her ideation.
Yes.
Could you tell us what ideation is, please?
This is beyond the scope of this hearing.
No, this was what we had discussed yesterday. You had objected to the word ideation and had some concern about what it meant. So she's entitled to examine on the subject.
Ideation is a psychiatric or psychological term that refers to thoughts contained in a piece of material, such as a note.
Would a screenplay be a piece of material such as a note?
That would be, no, I would not see that as in any way similar to a note.
Why not?
Because it has a very different purpose. I see it as having very different purposes. Something that's written as a note versus something that has a different goal of whatever it's being produced for.
All right, did you ever discuss the screenplay with the defendant?
No, I did not.
Okay, so basically the court will permit you to ask whether she read any screenplays written by the defendant, whether she discussed it with him, and that should be the extent of it. So everything else would be extraneous to that. And if there is something in the testimony of the prosecution experts that deals with this, then we can do it outside the presence of the jury. But I don't see any reason to consume any more time with this witness on this subject. All right, anything else now before the jury comes in?
I don't have anything else, Your Honor.
All right, we'll have the jury come in and then we'll proceed. Okay, let's give counsel a short break. Let's make it 5 minutes and then we'll proceed.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the information contained in this report, which is an incident with Craig Heinberg?
Yes,
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor.
Rephrase the question.
Are you familiar with the report which describes an incident with Craig Heinberg?
Same objection.
All right, an interview with Mr. Heinberg, is that it?
Yes. Are you familiar with a police report which describes an interview with Mr. Heinberg, which describes an incident?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, I am.
Did you take the information in that police report into account in evaluating Eric Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And did you discard the information contained in that report?
I didn't discard it. I took it into consideration, the total picture.
Did you take into consideration the theft, the grand theft, and the burglaries in Calabasas?
Yes, I did.
And did you have any opinion as to how the grand theft and the burglaries in Calabasas affected Eric Menendez's mental state?
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. Only one burglary and one grand theft.
All right, with that modification, you may answer the question.
Yes, I did take it into consideration. And
And what did you find?
what did I find? I found that there was certainly a serious problem in this family.
Did you think there was a problem with Mr. Eric Menendez as a result of your review of the information?
I felt it was a problem for the whole family, not just Eric Menendez.
But he was part of the family that you found a problem with, is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you find that there was any kind of sphere response which went into his commission of the grand theft and the burglary in Calabasas?
No, I did not evaluate it in that context.
And did you think that he was reacting to his neurobiological changes when he went into the two homes and took property belonging to others?
Object to the form of the question. It misstates the facts regarding the grand theft.
Overruled.
It was taken, that was taken in context with also with outcome, et cetera, in terms of a family issue in which it had significance for the family regarding the any of the fear response. No, I did not see that present.
All right. And did you notice the type of property which was taken in the second incident, that is the burglary of the Ginsburg home?
I was aware of that, yes.
And you were aware that it was a great deal of property, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. How would you classify that particular crime? Would it be disorganized or organized?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
And the legal basis of the
It's
objection?
an improper opinion with respect to a burglary type of thing.
Overruled.
I don't have that type of information. What I do know is that material was returned, that it certainly was symptomatic of other issues, and that's how I evaluated those two particular events.
Did you consider them to be criminal?
Well, they were handled, as I understand it, in a juvenile manner, so that they were handled through a legal system, and that he was given probation, and he was required, or he did, I guess it was not necessarily required, but he did seek counseling for that. And it was within a family context.
All right. But did you regard that behavior as criminal?
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. That's for improper opinion.
Overruled.
Well, the behavior was dealt with in a legal way, so that it certainly did impart that whether I would consider it that, I certainly consider it symptomatic of a larger issue.
Now, did you consider the Calabasas theft and burglary in your evaluation of Eric Menendez's state of mind on the night of August the 20th of 1989?
It was certainly a factor when I looked at all of the information that was available to me in evaluating what happened on August 20th.
Now, if the information given to you by Eric Menendez was untrue, does that change your opinion as to his state of mind?
Objection, Your Honor, given the court's previous ruling.
Overruled.
Could you repeat that, please? The question.
If the information given to you by Eric Menendez was untrue, does that change your opinion as to his state of mind on the night that he killed his parents?
Well, I did not determine it as untrue. I would have to be given considerable evidence to cite for me to base that it was untrue.
Well, did you review Eric Menendez's testimony in front of the juries about his purchase of the handguns?
Yes, I didn't. It was not a handgun.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
His attempt to purchase handguns at a Big Five in Santa Monica. Did you review that testimony?
Yes, I did review that.
And what was your opinion of whether or not he was telling the truth in that testimony?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. See, the people objected when I asked.
Wait, counsel, let's not argue the matter.
Okay, I would object. Possibly improper.
Objection sustained.
In evaluating Eric Menendez's truth-telling ability to you, did you consider what he said on the witness stand to this jury and the other jury about attempting to purchase handguns on the afternoon of the 18th of August of 1989?
Yes, I considered that.
And did you reject that as indicating that he was lying to you about anything?
No, I did not.
Did you consider that he might have been lying to you?
No, I did not consider. Why would he admit to something like that if he were, if it was not true? That
You
he
un-
went out to look for, that he and his brother went to purchase handguns. He did not have to say that.
Well, you are aware of the fact that the prosecution is in possession of gunshot purchase records from San Diego from later in the evening of the 18th of August of 1989, correct?
Yes, I am.
And you understand that that particular evidence could be interpreted as showing planning on the part of the defendants.
Oh, I don't see that as planning. If he was really going to plan something, why not wait the 2 weeks when he would have a weapon that was the more logical weapon to have if he was planning something?
Well, you are aware of the fact that either before or after the killings, the defendants came up with an alibi, correct?
They had a series of statements, yes.
And you are aware of the fact that in order for an alibi to work, a time needs to be established for a criminal activity.
Yes.
All right, so in other words, if I have an alibi, but no one can determine when the crime occurred, the alibi is pretty worthless.
Yes, but by the same token, an alibi is supposed to work, and this certainly did not work. I mean, they could have backed up everything so it would work. I mean, I think that's the point, that that alibi did not work, if you want to consider it as an alibi.
So are you saying because the alibi didn't work, it wasn't planned?
What I'm saying is that was a social plan that was in place, and it didn't work because of what happened immediately before that social plan was to be put into place, which was going to a movie and doing the rest of the activities that they had planned for that Sunday evening.
You believed Eric Menendez when he talked to you, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in order for an alibi to work, someone has to know what time the crime occurred, aside from the killer, correct?
I think at this point we're calling for speculation.
It goes to the witness's state of mind as far as her explanations of these things. You understand the question?
Yes.
And one way to notify people that a crime has occurred is to make noise, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, in this case, the neighbors were able to pin the time of the crime in a period of about 10 minutes.
That is correct.
Okay, one witness said it was at 10:10, one said approximately 10 o'clock.
Okay. Yes. I
Um,
read that.
So that in order for someone to have an alibi which is effective, somebody would have to know that the crime occurred at a particular time, let's say 10 o'clock or 10:10 on the night of August the 20th, correct?
All right. Yes.
And noise would be one way to accomplish that, correct?
Yes. Noise. Yes.
Now, you indicated the alibi was not successful. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what does that mean to you, that it wasn't successful?
Well, what that means to me is that it wasn't planned, that a plan means something is going to be carried off successfully.
Dr. Burgess, you are familiar with criminal activity because of your research with the FBI.
Yes, I am.
Plenty of criminals get caught who've planned. Wouldn't you agree?
I'm going to object to this now as argumentative.
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
Plenty of criminals get caught who've planned their crimes, correct?
I don't know how many get caught who plan their crime.
Are you aware of an incident in, I think it was the early 80s, when President Carter sent the military into Iran to rescue captives in Iran? Are you familiar?
I'm going to object to this as improper.
Sustain.
Okay.
Sustain.
Dr. Burgess, the fact that a plan doesn't work doesn't mean it wasn't planned.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this also. This has all been asked and answered by a previous round of cross-examination.
To some extent it has, but I'll give the prosecution limited leeway in this area. Overruled.
I basically believe that a plan is supposed to work, that in this case where there is the explanation is that it's a social plan that's already in place. What happens is an intervening aspect of this, and so the plan does not work. If the plan was to work, everything would have been backed up, so it would have worked. There was what contraindication for the shootings to have occurred earlier in the evening, so that then the plan if it was a plan, would be to go to the movies and go and meet these other people, et cetera, et cetera.
If the information that Eric Menendez gave to you about having been sexually molested was untrue, would that change your opinion as to whether or not he'd been sexually molested?
Well, that's one of the factors I look at, is to weigh the information that I have. That's precisely what one does when one renders an opinion.
Now, are you familiar with an instrument called a colposcope?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And what is a colposcope?
Colposcope is a magnifying instrument that takes pictures of certain areas of the body, and those pictures or photographs can then be examined by other persons.
Okay, and colposcopes are often used in child molest investigations to search for physical indicia of molestation. Is that correct?
I'm going to object to counsel testifying. This is beyond the scope of this witness's testimony and direct.
Objection overruled.
That is correct.
Now, in cases of sodomy, are there instances in which sodomy will leave anal scarring?
There may be instances where that occurs, yes.
It is rare, is it not?
That is my understanding of the literature,
Okay.
yes.
Now, you are a nurse, is that correct?
That is correct.
Are you entitled to do physical examinations because you're a nurse?
I do not have a nurse practitioner advanced practice certification for sexual assault exams.
But you have on prior occasions examined children to see if they've been sexually assaulted, is that correct?
I'm going to object to the question as vague as what you mean by examine.
Sustained. Referring to physical examinations?
No. You have on prior occasions conducted psychological evaluations of children to see if they've been sexually abused, correct?
Yes, I have.
Are you ever provided with information from medical doctors as to whether or not there are any physical findings to corroborate the child's claim of abuse?
Yes, I am.
Is that one thing you ask for in evaluating the truthfulness of a child's claim of child abuse?
Well, it's one piece of information that generally is available in the records if the child has been seen within a fairly recent time of the abuse.
Now, would it be fair to say that not all child abuse leaves physical findings?
Yes, that's true.
Oral copulation, for example, unless you get to the child right away, will not leave any physical findings, correct?
Well, unless also there's been injury to the throat, that
Correct.
would also provide a little bit of latitude in terms of time.
Did you ask for any examination to be done of Eric Menendez to corroborate his claim to you of sexual abuse?
My understanding is that there was going to be material specific to that.
Okay.
That was not something I was to do.
All right. Did you ever ask for that information before you concluded your examination of him psychologically?
Yes.
Were you provided with that information?
No, I do not have the report.
But you went ahead and made your conclusion without having the report, correct?
Yes, I did.
All right. So you have no present knowledge sitting here today as to whether or not there are any physical findings to corroborate what you have found psychologically. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. But you were informed that such an exam was going to be done. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as you sit here today in October of 1993, have you ever inquired as to the results of that physical exam?
Yes.
All right. And were you told the results of that exam?
It was a discussion about what we've just been discussing about how difficult it is to corroborate or to even find certain findings in a person a length of time after the abuse.
Okay. My question is, were you given any information about any results of physical exams done to Eric Menendez to corroborate his child abuse?
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to object as it calls for hearsay.
Objection overruled. Objection overruled.
I do not have that information.
Did you?
I told you we talked about it, but I don't have any report. That's correct.
Did you have an oral report from someone that there were or were not such findings
I'm going to
available?
object at this time on grounds of privilege, Your Honor, would like to be heard.
All right, you may do so.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Dr. Burgess, were you made aware at any time prior to today's date of the results of the physical examination of Eric Menendez?
Not specifically.
Were you generally made aware of the results of the exam?
Yes.
And what general information did you have?
Well, the general information is it's very difficult to determine scarring, anal scarring, so much time had elapsed so that in the general area that supported what I also would have suspected given the literature.
If there had been anal scarring, that would have enhanced your opinion that he had been in fact sexually abused, correct?
Oh, well, yes.
Okay. Now, my question to you is, were you in general given the results of the exam?
This has been answered.
She hasn't answered it. Did you get the results of the exam as far as whether or not any scarring or any other physical evidence was found?
No, I don't have any specific report from the person that has done the exam. I don't have any official direct information.
Since you knew there was a physical exam being done, did you think it was important to try to discover the results of the exam before you rendered your opinion in this courtroom?
Well, as I said, there was a general discussion about that satisfied my question and I felt I could render an opinion.
So is your answer yes, you found out the results before you rendered your opinion, or no, you did not find out the results before you rendered your opinion?
What I found out supported what both is in the literature and what is my understanding what the testimony may well be. I just don't have anything direct.
Was there a reason you didn't seek out the direct results?
My understanding there was no report available at the time I asked.
Did you ask for an oral report?
No,
Did you ask to speak to the doctor who conducted the exam?
no.
Aside from speaking to Eric Menendez and the doctors whose names you've given to us, who else did you speak to person, either on the phone or in person, about the facts of this case?
I spoke to the family members.
Which family members did you speak to?
I spoke to the two sisters of Jose Menendez,
And did
and I spoke to the sister of Mary Louise.
And that was Joan Vandermolen.
That's correct.
Did you speak to Mary Louise Menendez's brothers, Milton and Brian?
No, I did not.
Did you speak to Eric Menendez's paternal grandmother, Maria?
No, I did not.
When you spoke to Marta, when was that?
That was as recent, I think it was about 2 weeks ago.
At the time that you spoke to Marta Cano, were you aware of the testimony that she gave in this courtroom?
Your Honor, I'm going to object and ask to approach before the next question is asked.
Well, since we don't know what that question
Well,
is, I'm not going to. First of all, let me hear an answer to this question.
I read the testimony, yes.
Okay, were you aware of her testimony in regards to a lie she had told for Kitty Menendez to her husband to avoid her getting in trouble? Do you remember her testimony in that regard?
I believe I do.
And do you remember her testimony that it wasn't any big thing and that she would do the same for me?
Yes.
A person she didn't know.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
Okay, would that change your opinion as to the credibility of Marta Cano if you knew that she had made that testimony?
Well, it was in the testimony.
Okay, and you read it
I read it.
and you discarded it.
Well, it's not a matter of discarding or including. I read all the testimony and it's sifted and weighed through the whole procedure. It was a piece of information that was available.
Are you aware of what the Rosenhan study is?
Yes.
Did you consider the Rosenhan study in evaluating the credibility of the information you were given in this case?
Now, that's a very different type of situation, not at all analogous to this situation.
Did you consider that the possibilities that are outlined in the Rosenhan study in evaluating the witnesses in this case?
Well, again, I didn't specifically do it because that's a study that was done many years ago, and it just so happens I read it many years ago. So to ask me to even think about it is testing my long-term memory.
Well, I did ask you about 2 days ago when you were in the audience if you were familiar with the Rosenhan
Yes.
study.
Yeah.
And since that time, have you thought about the Rosenhan study and its applicability to this case?
Well, that's what I said. I have tested my long-term memory to see what I did remember about it because I read it so long ago.
And what is your understanding of what the Rosenhan study is?
Objection, Your Honor, the witness did not rely on
Did you rely upon that study in making any opinions in this case?
No, I did not. No, I did not.
Objection sustained.
Did you choose to ignore the things discussed in the Rosenhan study in your evaluation of this case?
Objection, Your Honor, it's an improper question.
Overruled.
Did you choose to ignore it?
I didn't even think about it. I really, as I said, until you brought it to my attention, I hadn't thought about it in probably 10 years.
Are you familiar with the book I'm holding up as the DSM-3R?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with the concept of malingering?
As identified in there, yes, I am.
All right, you were here when I was cross-examining Dr. Tyler, were you not?
Yes, I was.
And you were here when I read this to Dr. Tyler?
Yes, I was.
Without reading it again, did you consider the possibility of malingering in your evaluation of Eric Menendez and what he was telling you about what had happened to him?
I always consider those factors in any evaluation I do.
And in considering malingering, did you also consider his testimony in regards to the attempt to purchase handguns at the Big Five sporting goods store in Santa Monica?
Objection asked and answered.
Yes.
Okay, and did you see any correlation between what he told the juries about his attempts to purchase handgun and the concept of malingering as it's defined in this book?
No, I didn't see any evidence of those factors under malingering.
Have you ever driven the route that Eric Menendez and his brother say they took after they killed their parents?
No, I have not driven the route. I'm not sure I could find that route.
You don't
A
live,
lot of people can't find that route.
all right, well,
Or you mean just drive the freeway?
no, I'm talking about driving from the home to Century City, back to Century City, up to Mulholland and Coldwater, back to Beverly Hills and into Santa Monica. Have you driven that route?
No, I have not.
Your Honor, I'm going to object if there's any questions that are going to be asked with fact specific for no foundation.
All right, objection. We'll have to wait until there's another question.
This is Victoria objection.
Now, you understand that the neighbors placed the time of the crime due to their hearing the shotgun noises at between 10 and 10:10 on the night in question.
Yes, that is my understanding.
And you understand as well that at 11:07 p.m. that same night, there was a phone call made on Mr. Menendez's credit card, which Lyle Menendez has admitted that he made from the Santa Monica Civic to his friend Perry Berman.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So you're familiar with the time period between 10 p.m. and 11:07.
Yes, I am.
Are you also familiar with the testimony of Lyle Menendez in regards to what he did during that period of time?
Yes, I am.
Did you ever in your evaluation consider the possibility that what he said they did could not have occurred in the 67 minutes?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that. It assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Did you consider that possibility, Dr. Burgess?
In the time element, no, I did not consider in specifically in the amount of time it takes, and I didn't see that in any police reports recreating that.
Well, until the defendants testified, the police didn't know where the defendants said they went
Your Honor,
after
I'm
the
gonna
crime,
object to
correct?
this as argumentative.
Sustained. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, are you familiar with the concept of suggestibility as it relates to child molest victims?
Yes, I am.
And would you tell the jury what suggestibility is?
Suggestibility is a concept that is introduced that says very young children in the questioning by law enforcement or investigative persons or therapists in some way conduct their interview so as to suggest to the child a response.
And that concept of suggestibility can lead to false accusations of child abuse, correct?
Well, that's never been really carefully reviewed. It certainly is suggested in the literature that that's one thing that happens.
Did you ever do any studies on the McMartin preschool case, Dr. Burgess?
No. Any studies?
Yeah, did you ever read any studies about the McMartin preschool case?
I talked to people, but I didn't study it.
Did you have any interest in the McMartin case?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this as irrelevant.
Sustained.
Now, the concept of suggestibility then is, according to your definition, the idea that very young children can be led into saying things that are untrue. Would that be correct?
I'm not saying that they're untrue, but they can be suggested because of the way the child's thinking patterns are, very young children, that it can be introduced
And
and a child will agree with it.
why is it that a very young child then would be susceptible to suggestibility?
Because of their memory development.
Now, do you think an adult facing criminal charges would be open to the notion of suggestibility?
Objection calls for speculation, improper opinion.
Overruled.
I'm not aware of studies on an older population that has really looked at that and suggestibility in this type of situation. There may be experimental studies, but I'm not aware of any clinical studies.
When was your first contact with Eric Menendez?
August of 1992.
So approximately 15 months ago, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ever ask for any psychiatric reports for him from any other psychological experts who had either examined him or who had treated him?
Well, there were a lot of records that came in from the school department. I had those.
Now, you indicated you spoke with Dr. Vickery.
Yes.
Did you ever get any report from Dr. Vickery?
Well, we discussed his findings, so I did not get a report. No, I have not seen a report.
So in lieu of a written report, there was a verbal report to you, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you ever ask to see the records of Dr. Oziel?
I have seen certainly all of his testimony, and I have seen material that's been introduced here in court,
Have you seen any other,
in grand jury.
yes, have you seen any other records or notes of Dr. Oziel?
Your Honor, I'd like to approach on this.
Objection overruled. Request is denied.
Did you ever see any other notes or records from Dr. Oziel aside from the things that were testified to here in court?
Well, I've seen those materials
you
printed
saying-
out.
Are you
And-
saying that you saw a print out of the cassette that he made for those 2 sessions?
Yes, I believe that's what I've seen. Yes.
Are you aware of the
And-
fact that Eric Menendez was undergoing treatment by Dr. Oziel prior to the killings of his parents?
Yes,
Your
I
Honor,
am.
Object to the form of the question assumes the fact not in evidence that what was happening was treatment.
Overruled. Objection overruled.
Did you ever ask to speak with Dr. Oziel about Eric Menendez's visits to him prior to his parents' killings?
No, I did not.
Why not?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
Overruled.
I just didn't.
Didn't you consider it important to talk to the psychologist who was treating him at or near the time of his parents' deaths?
No, given that I had a lot of material that was already available through many pages of transcripts.
But a psychological, the notes or an interview with the therapist who was treating him at the time of the killings of his parents would maybe give you some insight into his state of mind.
Objection, argument.
Sustained to the form of the question.
Do you think that a psychologist who was treating him at or near the time of his parents' death would be able to provide you with insight into Eric Menendez's state of mind preceding his parents' killings?
Well, it depends on the type of notes, and my understanding were these were reconstructed notes, so that I'm not sure that that would provide the very best of understanding, and it was material that was available.
Well, who gave you the material?
The material was testified to.
Okay. Who gave you the other material that wasn't testified to?
Well, that was given to me by defense. You mean in terms of the transcriptions and so forth? That was all provided to me.
Did you ever ask them to give you any information that had not been provided to you?
No, they gave me all information as far as I knew that I could see that would be helpful to me. So I feel I have seen all that I need to see regarding Dr. Oziel and
right.
his interaction with the defendant.
And so you never sought to either get notes from Dr. Oziel or to interview him, is that correct?
I don't think that's what I'm saying. I didn't see the need to call him and talk to him. That's correct.
But you thought that the information from the sisters and the siblings of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez was of importance, and you spoke with them directly, correct?
That is true.
Okay, but you chose not to speak to Dr. Oziel.
But I had a lot of materials. I don't think that I was excluded from a lot of material that I was able to review regarding regarding him.
Were you ever told that you could not have access to Dr. Oziel?
No. Oh, to Dr. Oziel, no.
I believe you indicated that you've testified in the past about 20 to 30 times for the prosecution. Is that correct?
Yes,
Have you testified for the defense before?
yes.
And how many occasions have you testified for the defense?
I believe about 5 or 10 to 10 times.
Have you ever examined a child and found that that child was not, in fact, in your opinion, the victim of sexual abuse even though the child claimed to have been.
Oh, yes, and I have written on that.
All right, and what was it? What things do you look for in assessing whether or not a child is telling the truth? Let me back up. What do you look for in assessing whether or not the child has been abused?
Look for the same things that I've already described. You look for consistency. You look for, with small children, you look for symptoms. You would look for any type of corroborating evidence. You look at the background history. If you have any information on the named abuser, you look at that.
Now,
All of those factors.
and when you've interviewed children and found them not to be telling the truth to you about having been abused, what went into your determination that those children had not been abused?
What went into my determination that there was more to what is being stated, and so that we took a position of trying to inquire more into the story and to see why indeed the statement was made. And we would usually try to complete that part of our inquiry so that we were satisfied, and we could then, because it tended to be in a treatment situation, we could make the right type of treatment or recommend the right kind of treatment.
Because if a child claims to have been abused and hasn't been abused, the child still needs some sort of treatment, correct?
Yes, that's what they're generally coming for.
Now, you've indicated that one of the things you consider is why the statement was made. Are you talking about the statement of the self-report of abuse?
Well, it would be the whole statement of the situation that the evaluation contains.
Okay, one of the things you look at, for instance, is in a child custody battle, whether or not the child might be fabricating child abuse in order to go with one parent or another.
Well, that, yes, child custody situations tend to have the higher rate of what is called the false accusation.
Okay. What about someone who's incarcerated for murder? Do you think that person might have a reason to make a false accusation of child molestation?
Well, again, that's the context, and that's something that we did talk about yesterday, is that does play an important role in sifting and sorting the information that one is presented, given as much as I am able to gather.
How many adult children, strike that, how many people accused of murder have you interviewed for claims of child abuse?
Well, there was one study that we looked at, I think.
Are you asking how many that
Oh.
she herself?
Yeah, I'm
Oh.
asking you how many you personally have done.
Yeah.
Do you understand the question?
No, do you mean
How many
No.
times have you talked to someone who's incarcerated for murder and claims to have been physically, psychologically, or sexually abused as a child?
Well, there are two parts there. One, we have data on juveniles and have published on that. But second of all, that I personally have talked to, I can think of two
Aside
as
from
juveniles.
okay, two aside from this case.
Right, directly. But again, I've been involved in a study that really looked at juveniles who have, they were incarcerated for murder.
Well, Eric Menendez is not a juvenile. Would you agree with that?
Well, juvenile, correct. Given California, I understand California's laws. Juvenile usually goes by the state as to the age.
The age of majority in the United States is 18,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
And you heard me ask this of Dr. Tyler. We draft young men of the age of 18, correct?
Yeah, I don't think we draft anybody anymore either, so let's ask it
All
a
right.
different way.
We send 18-year-olds to die for their country,
I'm going to
correct?
object to that. We don't do that either.
All right, rephrase the question. It is argumentative.
Eric Menendez is not a juvenile, correct?
Correct.
And you've given a lot of testimony about children who are abused, correct?
Correct.
But when you interviewed him, he was not a child, correct?
Legally, that's correct.
Okay. In fact, he was almost 22 years old when you interviewed him,
That's correct.
and he was in custody,
Yes,
and he was charged with murder.
that is correct.
Now, since the early 80s, has there been a great deal of literature published about child abuse?
Yes.
And it's one of the watershed events that occurred to trigger that generation of literature, the McMartin case.
I'm going to object again to reference to the McMartin case unless counsel's role in that case. is-
Counsel, why do you have to make a speech? You have an objection. The objection is argumentative. Objection overruled.
I'm objecting to reference. to the law.
Objection overruled.
Is that one of the things that occurred?
That is one of the publicized cases that occurred. That's correct.
And is it your understanding that there is a great deal of literature now available that was not available prior to the early 80s on the issue of child sexual abuse?
Yes, but that's not because of one particular case. It's because more cases are being reported.
Correct.
So there's more to study. So there's therefore more to publish on.
Now, how many different journals are there in existence in the psychological field which deal with the issue of child abuse? And I'm talking about generic child abuse.
I know of one that specifically deals with the generic, and it's called child abuse and neglect.
All right. Are there any other journals that deal with interfamily violence?
Yes,
And what's the name of that journal?
that's the Journal of Interpersonal Violence.
Are there any other journals aside from that one which deal with issues such as child abuse?
There is the Journal of Child Sexual Abuse.
Now, do any of these journals contain articles which give specific anecdotes about specific cases?
Generally not in those journals. They tend to be peer-reviewed for its scientific merit, and there tends to be a reluctance to put in details other than statistical details.
Are there publications available in the public realm which deal with the issue of child abuse and give detailed anecdotes about specific cases of child abuse?
Object, the question is vague as to what public realm is.
Overall. You understand it?
Yes. Again, and the journals I've just identified I would not consider in the public realm. It's in the professional realm. So if you're expanding it to public, I doubt the public would really have access to those journals unless they were going to go to a library to research.
But if one were a citizen and went to the library to research, one could find those journals, correct?
Only if they have the library subscribed to that.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
So if the library subscribed to the journal and one wanted to go look at them, one could, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to object to this as well.
Well, it
And it
doesn't call for speculation, but it's not relevant. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, are there books which are published which deal specifically with anecdotes about child abuse, which are available in the public realm?
I'm going to object again to the question's called speculation.
Overall.
required.
Objection overall.
There are books that can be purchased through the public realm.
Which contain specific anecdotes about incidences of child abuse, correct?
Well, that I don't know because I don't tend to read those books, but I really don't know how much anecdotal material is contained in those type of books.
Dr. Burgess, if a person wanted to convince you that they had been sexually abused, one of the things that you would find persuasive would be the amount of detail you were given, correct?
Objection argumentative. It calls for speculation about what some other person wants to do.
Overall.
Well, detail is one of the criteria that one does take into consideration in the evaluation of a statement.
Is it possible for a person to fabricate that kind of detail?
Well, for a person to do that, they would almost have to have a personal reference library to be able to search out that kind of material.
Now, you indicated that detail was something that you found to be important in assessing the credibility of Eric Menendez, correct?
Yes,
And did you do any kind of psychological testing of Eric Menendez?
I was not asked to. No, I did not.
Did you view any psychological testing of Eric Menendez that others had done?
I haven't seen any specific testing done.
Well, in evaluating his state of mind, did you consider it important to see any psychological testing that had been done?
No, I did not consider that I needed that.
Did you ever diagnose Eric Menendez as having any kind of mental disorder or mental disease?
No, I did not.
And in fact, he does not have such mental disorder or disease. Is that correct?
That is my opinion, yes.
All right. But it's your opinion that he had some sort of condition similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. That we were talking more about the fear response. I did not give a diagnosis of what you just said.
All right, so you didn't diagnose him with any kind of disorder or defect or disease. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you cannot test him for this neurological recoding, correct?
That is correct.
Now, in evaluating Eric Menendez, I believe you indicated that it was your opinion that based upon the abuse that he'd had as a child, that the fear response would have influenced him on the night of his parents' killings, correct?
That is correct.
Did you consider how the fear response worked after the killings in the formulation of the alibi and the statements to the police?
I considered how the fear response worked after the shootings. Yes, that was a major consideration.
Did you consider it significant that after this extremely traumatic event, that Eric Menendez and his brother were able to go back into the room and pick up the shells?
I considered that, yes.
And did you have any psychological explanation for how they were able to do that if they were working on autopilot?
Well, that is one of the post-crime types of behavior that we did talk about, and there are two explanations for that. One we've already discussed of picking up that, but these are decisions that I believed are made after the initial the shootings. So that one is to pick up the guns and the shotgun shells. A second reason is because that is a very they didn't want those there, and what that reminded them of, it certainly reminded them of what had happened.
Did you consider the possibility that they had decided in advance of the crime to pick up the shotgun shells?
I entertain that because one does. That's what one looks at in terms of looking at behavior. What was described to me matches much more in terms of the exhaustion, the waiting for the police, wondering why the police didn't come, with the enormous amount of noise that was made, etc. When that didn't happen, then there was a new behavior that went into play, and that's the post-crime behavior that we've talked about.
Did you consider the statement that Eric Menendez gave to Sergeant Edmonds at approximately 1:20 a.m. on the morning of the 21st of August of 1989?
Yes, I consider all the statements that were made by Eric Menendez to the police to be highly important and significant regarding the fear response.
Okay. Was Eric Menendez in fear when he told the police that he'd gone to see Batman at the Century 14 theaters?
No, not on that statement.
Were there other statements in here in which he was in fear?
There are other statements that indeed speak to his truthfulness in placing him at the scene of the crime.
And you're saying that he intentionally told the police that?
It is my belief that he's being very honest at that, on all of those occasions that comes through.
All right, but he wasn't honest about where he'd been that evening, correct?
That is the one untrue statement that is consistently made, that they do go, both he and his brother go to see a Batman movie.
At the time of the crime. And he, correct?
Well, I don't know whether it's that precise in terms of time. I don't believe that I know that that's the statement they made.
Now I want to back up to your testimony about his sexual abuse. You've indicated that there were certain symptoms that you saw in Eric Menendez which led you to the conclusion, or which supported his statement that he'd been sexually abused, correct?
Yes.
And some of those symptoms were things such as stomach aches and crying and behavior such as that.
Yes.
Can you distinguish in looking at stomach aches and crying whether they're caused by physical abuse, sexual abuse, or psychological abuse?
No.
Okay. And in fact, psychological abuse will cause stomach aches and crying as well as sexual abuse, correct?
Yes.
So the fact that he had those symptoms does not mean that he was sexually abused, does it?
That is true.
It is merely corroborative of some type of abuse.
Yes, and they're just really described as general anxiety symptoms.
Okay. And a child can have those anxiety symptoms without even being abused, can't he?
That is true.
In fact, if a child is nervous about a test or nervous about an event, a stomach ache might be something very probable to find.
Yes.
In examining Eric Menendez and the detail that he gave you in discussing his crime, did you ever do a psychological history of Eric Menendez? In other words, did you take a history of him for purposes of evaluating?
Yes, I took a history of him.
Did you ask him any questions about his sexuality?
Yes,
And did you receive any information from him about his sexuality?
yes,
And did you consider that information in deciding whether or not the detail he gave you came from a source other than his father?
I took that into consideration.
And did you reject the notion that he could have gotten this information from someone aside from his father?
Yes, I did reject that
And why was that?
because of the information he gave me. There's no other history.
Right. And so you accepted as true what he told you about his sexual history. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, one of the other symptoms which I think you indicated you might see in a child who had been abused generically were outbursts at school. Is that correct?
Yes,
You found no such evidence in this case, did you?
of outbursts at school. These are usually in young children. No, I did not find any history of outbursts at school.
All right. And you indicated, well, when you say it's something in young children, you examined his school records from the time of preschool till high school, correct?
Yes,
All right. And you found no such evidence, correct?
that's right.
You indicated that there were problems with his, I think you said his grades, which was indicative to you that perhaps it was corroborative of his statements.
Well, one of the lack of concentration and the which was described both by school teachers, coaches. Yes, I did consider that.
The lack of concentration, could you say that that was attributable to psychological, sexual, or physical abuse? Could you say which form of abuse that would be attributable to?
No, you can't, but it is a symptom.
And his grades and his performance in school, did you ever consider that his poor performance was attributable to his hectic tennis schedule?
No, it was attributed to his performance anxiety and the enormous pressure that he felt under.
Well, so you didn't consider the fact that he was playing tennis all the time and didn't have time to perform in school?
Well, that is pressure that comes from the parents that put this pressure on him to do it because they're the ones that are responsible for driving him around and making sure he's where he's supposed to be.
But even without parental pressure, with the schedule that he had of sports, would you expect him to be able to maintain straight A's?
Objection, Your Honor, that's the relevant question.
Rephrase the question. Objection sustained.
Did you consider the fact that his performance in school was in part attributable to the fact that he was concentrating on athletics rather than academics?
Well, no, as he said, he was concentrating as much as he could on academics and as well as on sports. And given his IQ, it is a little curious that he didn't perform better.
When you say his IQ, what do you mean? Are you aware of what his IQ is?
My understanding is he's certainly in the average to bright range.
Okay, and he would be bright enough to memorize or repeat a tale about himself that wasn't true, isn't he?
Objection, Your Honor, argument.
Overruled.
He is, isn't he?
Well, I will say he's certainly of average intelligence, and how people memorize things usually recall he possibly. No, I'm not going to say that I have any evidence of that in terms of his memory and reciting things. I think he tried to do that in one of his courses and had difficulty.
Are you familiar with the testimony of his teacher from Beverly Hills High School that he recited a soliloquy from, I think it was Richard II?
Right, that is the one that he had an opportunity to do it over to her.
And are you familiar with the fact that Eric Menendez had aspirations of becoming an actor?
He enjoyed drama lessons. I know that was something cited in the material.
Okay, and are you saying that his intelligence is not sufficient to memorize lines or scenes sufficient to become an actor?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. It goes beyond her expertise and what it takes to be an actor.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
Did you consider his intelligence and his acting in evaluating the truthfulness of the information that he gave you about what had happened to him?
I took that into consideration, yes.
Did you reject those?
Yes, essentially, yes.
Have you ever done any studies on families where the children are raised to be sports stars, like tennis stars or ice skating champions or things like that?
No,
Have you ever read any studies about those kinds of families and what sacrifices they make?
no.
I believe that you indicated one of the other things that you found significant is that the family was a secretive family. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Are all families that are secretive families where sexual abuse goes on?
No,
Now, the things and the symptoms, the details that Eric Menendez told you and the symptoms that you saw in him were not unique. Would that be fair to say?
no, they're common, that there are symptoms that are commonly seen in abused children. So
All
they're
right.
not unique per se. They fit a pattern.
So if I came to you and told you that I had been sexually molested, you would expect detail from me, correct?
Not necessarily. It depends on the person's age. It depends on how recent the event was. Now, you have to take a lot of other factors into consideration when you're looking at memory.
But if I gave you detail, you would find that corroborative of the truth of what I was telling you, correct?
That's one of the factors one looks at, yes.
And if I were to read literature about child abuse, I could tell you that I was having nightmares, correct?
Your Honor, this is argumentative and there's no foundation. It's
Sustained
improper
as to the form of the question.
Dr. Burgess, nightmares is a classic symptom of child abuse, correct?
Yes, it's one of the symptoms.
Stomach aches are a classic symptom of child molesting, is that correct?
But these are general anxiety symptoms. That's what has to be looked at, is that they can also be found in other populations, but it does point to some stress or something, some anxiety that's existing.
And if I were going to tell you that I had been abused, then the presence of those types of things would be corroborative. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily. You have to look at many more things, and that's what I'm trying to say, is you just don't take one bit of information. You have to put it in the total picture.
If I gave you details of specific instances, I told you I had nightmares, I told you that I had stomach aches, that would be corroborative of my claim that I'd been abused, correct?
It would be one factor that I would look at. I'd also look at your affect and how you motion, how you told it, a lot of other aspects.
Now, I take it, and I've asked you this previously, but you did review the testimony of Eric Menendez when he was cross-examined by Mr. Kuriyama about purchasing the handguns, correct?
Asked and answered and again misstates the evidence.
Right, attempting to purchase handguns.
Yes,
Objection overruled.
Yes,
and you found that testimony to be credible, is that correct?
yes,
And if they do not sell handguns at the Big Five sporting goods store, do you
Yes.
still find that to be credible?
yes, I do.
Did you see the detail into which Mr. Menendez went in describing the weapon that he had chosen to purchase?
Yes.
And did you consider that to be a lie?
No, I did not consider that to be a lie, the detail.
Did you consider that there would have been no discussion at the Big Five about a 14-day waiting period for a weapon they did not sell?
Objection, Your Honor,
consider
this
that?
is counsel's argument. Argumentative.
Rephrase the question.
Did you think to yourself, gee, how could he have gone to buy a handgun and been told there was a 14-day waiting period for something that they didn't carry? Did you think
Again,
that to yourself?
argumentative, Your Honor.
Right, objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, why is it that you found that particular testimony to be explicable as credible?
The reason I found that to be credible is that, first of all, it didn't have to be revealed. Second of all, that's a peripheral detail, if you will. The name of the store is a peripheral detail from the intent, which was stated to purchase a handgun or to purchase a weapon. So given the fact that it was volunteered when it didn't have to be volunteered, and as noted the second being the peripheral detail, but even more important, I think, is the record from the Lewis School that says that he had a difficulty, certainly at age 15, with dysnomia, which is a tendency not to state the right name and so forth. Those were the factors that went into my decision to believing that he went to a store to purchase with the intent to purchase a handgun for protection.
Does dysnomia cause one to hear things that aren't said?
It's the naming of something. I was talking about the name of the store.
Right. My question is, does dysnomia cause a person to hear things that are not said?
I don't know.
Does dysnomia cause you to lie?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Overruled.
Dysnomia has a tendency to, but for the person not to name the correct store in this case.
Dr. Burgess, do you consider it significant in looking at planning activity that weapons are purchased in advance of the crime?
It depends on the intent of purchasing a weapon.
If one is intending to kill someone, do you consider it important that weapons were purchased in advance of the crime?
In a hypothetical, if that's the intent of purchasing a gun,
Right. Would you expect someone who was trying to avoid responsibility to try to explain away the purchase of guns prior to a homicide?
well, I think there is an explanation for why the guns were purchased.
But if the explanation is untrue, that doesn't negate the purchase of the weapons, does it?
Objection argumentative.
The question is ambiguous. You have to rephrase it. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, you said that one thing that convinced you that Eric Menendez was telling the truth about attempting to purchase handguns is that he didn't have to reveal it, correct?
Yes,
Did
correct.
you consider that he might have to explain why shotguns were purchased the 2 nights before the murders?
Yes,
Did you consider that was something that he had to explain away in this trial in order to avoid any signs of planning?
well, it would be a question that would be asked.
And did you also understand that the alibi that was set up in the afternoon of the 20th of August also had to be explained away?
Objection, Your Honor, that assumes facts, not evidence. That's argument.
Overruled.
I think I've said I don't see that as an effective plan. Didn't work.
Dr. Burgess, just because a plan doesn't work doesn't mean it isn't an effective plan.
Argumentative, Your Honor, and that's been asked 6 times.
Overruled.
Oh, I'm wrong.
Rephrase the question, however, as far as the way it's phrased, not as to its being repetitive.
Dr. Burgess, did you consider that in this particular case, there were 2 pieces of evidence that would have to be explained away by the defendants, the purchase of the guns and the contact with Perry Berman prior to the murders?
Well, those are 2 factors, yes.
And those are 2 factors which could hypothetically show premeditation, couldn't they?
They might be construed that way, yes.
They might be construed that way.
Yes, it depends on which theory you are operating under and why the person is purchasing the guns.
But if in fact the purchase of the guns 2 hours away using false identification is in fact incriminating, then one might feel compelled to try to explain that away, correct?
Your Honor, argumentative.
Sustained.
Now,
Objection sustained.
May we have our morning break, please?
Well, how much longer do you have?
I can probably finish by noon.
All right, we'll take a 10-minute break. Please make it 9 minutes. Let's get back in 10 minutes after the hour.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Dr. Burgess, one of the things an expert such as yourself considers in evaluating claims of child sexual abuse is the medical history of that child. Is that correct?
It may be one factor, yes.
And in fact, in this case, did you examine the medical history of Eric Menendez to see if you could corroborate what he told you?
I did not examine him medically.
Did you examine his medical records?
Yes, through childhood and on up, yes.
And you've indicated that there is an entry dealing with injury to the soft palate, uvula, and pharynx, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Did you find any other injuries or any other physical injuries in his childhood medical records which would corroborate his claim of sexual abuse?
That was the one, that was an unexplained injury. That's the only one, and the other history in those 3 pages had a series of sore throats. Those were the only other aspects of that record, office visit records. No, I did not find anything other than what you've just identified, plus a lot of sore throats.
Okay. Sore throats do not mean the child has been sexually abused, do they?
No, sore throats don't, but if you have that unexplained injury and then you have a series of sore throats, it certainly is information that can be considered.
Did you see any information in his medical history indicating that he'd ever had any lower gastrointestinal examinations?
No, I don't believe I saw any GI disorders, gastrointestinal disorders.
Do you remember contained within his medical records, there's reference to him being given a GI to evaluate a stomachache and an evaluation of his bowel. Do you remember seeing that in his medical records?
No, I don't remember that.
If that kind of information were available to you, would you look at it to see if there was any abnormality to the bowel?
Not necessarily to the bowel.
No indication when this was done.
Well, just in general, the question is, would she have examined it? Your answer.
Would you consider that significant in looking for indicia of sodomy?
Not with GI disturbance, not necessarily.
Okay. May I approach, please?
Yes.
Can I see if something's going to be shown? Okay. All right.
You provided with the information contained in the document I'm showing you, which is a written transcription of office notes from the pediatric group in Princeton.
Yes,
And you're familiar with the first entry on this page, correct?
yes, I am.
And that is the incident that you referred to dealing with the damage to the pharynx, among other things.
That is correct.
And the note indicates that the patient, which was Eric Menendez, was seen in the emergency room the day prior to this notation. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Did you ever ask to see the emergency room notes of that particular visit?
My understanding is they were not available, that they did try to get them. I mean, I would have looked at them if they were available. I have not seen them.
All right. So you have not seen the emergency room notes from that visit, correct?
From the previous day
From-
you're talking about?
Yes, from the previous day, from the emergency room visit.
Yes, but I have a reason for why I do not believe they're available.
Okay, but you haven't seen them, correct?
No,
Right. Now, I believe you indicated one of the things that could have caused that injury would have been a penis. Is that correct?
it could have been.
Were there other things that could have caused that injury?
It would have been something inserted into the mouth. It could have been a stick.
Well, you don't know whether the injury was a burn or not, do you?
A burn?
Yes, a burn.
No, I don't know if it was a burn.
And if it was a burn, then that would be inconsistent with a penis, wouldn't it?
If it was a burn and they had identified it and there was a description of it, that would be inconsistent with a sexual injury.
Okay, and there, you have no description aside from what is contained in this particular report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the only description of injury is hurt, H-U-R-T, correct?
Yes, but hurt generally means injury.
All right, but that's the only indication you have is that there's a hurt.
Yes.
And there's no identification whether it's a burn or a laceration or a bruise.
That would have been described in that report there. There would have been more description if they had that amount of detail, I believe. And it was 3 areas of the throat.
So what are you saying about what it would have said?
It should have said if any of those factors that you just identified, that if by hurt, it would have been described what type of hurt, by burn, by etc. It's not identified there.
So you can't extrapolate at all from that what was the source of the injury, correct?
That's correct.
And you found nothing else aside from sore throats in his childhood medical history to corroborate a claim of sexual abuse. Is that correct?
That's what I've just said.
And you did not apprise yourself of the results of the physical exam which was conducted upon him before you came to testify with the colposcope.
No, that's been described in general. I did identify that was, I was given information on that.
You were not given specific information about the results, however, were you?
No, because they're going to be presented.
And you didn't consider it important to know the precise results of that physical examination before you rendered your opinion, correct?
I do believe I got information regarding that I've already said, that there was no way to determine consistently that there was a link to sodomy.
Are you saying that there was no physical injury found? There was no sign of physical injury found?
That could be linked specifically to anal injury, yes.
Now, you've indicated as well that one of the things you consider significant in this case are the 2 photographs which were on the board yesterday, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How do you know that Mr. Menendez took those photographs?
I don't know who took those photographs. Somebody I know that somebody in the family did.
Have you ever seen a child take a photograph?
I've seen children. What age?
8-year-old children. Have you ever seen an 8-year-old child handle a camera?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this as completely irrelevant, no foundation.
Overall.
8-year-olds, if they have a camera, may take cameras, but I'm not familiar with how 8-year-olds take pictures.
Do you think an 8-year-old has the cognitive development, a normal 8-year-old has the cognitive development sufficient to point and click a camera?
Yes,
And so you have no specific information aside from what you were told by the defendants that those pictures were in fact taken by their father.
that is correct.
And you're familiar with the fact that the photographs are interspersed with photographs of Eric Menendez's 6th birthday party.
That is correct.
Okay, and those photographs of the 6th birthday party do not contain any naked children, correct?
At the party, that's correct.
I believe you talked about child molesters in general, and you spoke about Jose Menendez, and you indicated that his personality and the way he ran his business and the way he ran his family, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So was that consistent with your view of him as a child molester, or inconsistent, or what?
Consistent with someone who is autocratic, very controlling, very domineering, is used to getting what he wants, is able to silence people, to be able to keep information very controlled. Those are the factors I would identify, and those are factors that are necessary for any child molester to be able to continue incestuous behavior.
So would you say that all child molesters who are engaged in incestuous behavior are autocratic?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that those are some of the characteristics that would be given in terms of the patterns and the profiles of someone. They are consistent with someone who would be able to do this to their son.
There is no profile of typical child molester, is there, Dr. Burgess?
The profiles generally get into what's called fixated and regressed, and it does identify within those categories. There is material based on research that is in the literature.
Are you familiar with the testimony of one of the prior witnesses that there is no one of the prior expert witnesses that there is no profile of a child molester?
Well, again, it depends on what you're defining as profile. Characteristics are generally useful in describing.
There are child molesters who are not autocratic, correct?
Yes,
And there are child molesters who do not deal with the world in the same way that Mr. Menendez did, correct?
yes,
And those people are able to engage in incestuous interfamily relationships, correct?
yes, but they will have characteristics that are quite different from what we see in this case, and they still are able to maintain the secrecy to pressure the child and to ensure that, to isolate their child. There's still a lot of things that persons that are not necessarily as, from a business standpoint, skilled, able to do.
We talked a lot about isolation as something that is achieved by a child molester to keep the child quiet. Now, did you study Mr. Menendez with a view to determining what kind of personality he had?
I looked at all the material as to how he was described by others who knew him, yes.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez and his wife sent their son to a psychologist?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Can you explain to me why a child molester would send his child to a psychologist?
Well, for several reasons. One, it was part of the probationary aspect. Second of all, and I think probably most importantly, that a waiver was given by their son that information could be given directly by the psychologist to the family, and also the family were being seen in part in sessions.
Dr. Burgess, the waiver was a 1-month waiver from January the 18th until February the 18th of 1989.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that. It's argumentative and it misstates Dr. Aziel's testimony.
All right, you're referring to a particular document?
Yes, Exhibit 127.
Rephrase the question to objection sustained as to the form of the question.
Are you familiar with an exhibit in this trial that's been testified about, which I showed to Dr. Tyler when you were in the courtroom, which was a waiver of confidentiality signed by Eric Menendez?
Yes, I am.
And that waiver was for a 1-month period, correct?
That is correct.
And you're aware of the fact that Eric Menendez saw Dr. Aziel for a considerable period of time before that waiver was executed?
Yes, I am.
Now, in your study of child molesters, and I take it you've studied child molesters as well as child abuse victims, correct?
Yes.
What is the frequency of a child molester being a heterosexual, a pedophile, and a homosexual?
Excuse me, Your Honor, I think the question's vague. All three at once or
Yes.
among
You
those?
understand the question?
Not really.
Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Burgess, if Jose Menendez was having sex with his son, his pre-adolescent son, he would be considered to be a pedophile, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And why do pedophiles, in your opinion, have sex with children?
For issues of dominance and power, those are the primary factors, even though it does occur in a sexual context.
In addition to having dominance and power, do pedophiles find children sexually exciting?
Pedophiles do, yes.
Are you aware of the fact that Jose Menendez had an affair with a woman, an adult woman, during at least 8 years of his marriage?
Yes, I am.
And you're aware of the fact that he had relationships with his wife as well?
Yes, it's been introduced in the record, yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure
Well,
that's a fact.
well, she had 2 children, so he had sex with her
Yes.
twice.
Well, I'm
Yes.
going to object to that, Your Honor, as irrelevant to the question. of that.
Objection overruled. Objection.
Okay, so we know he engaged in heterosexual conduct, correct?
Yes.
And if Eric Menendez is to be believed, he engaged in pedophilic conduct, correct?
I'd call it incestuous behavior.
But it also means he's a pedophile. He's a child molester.
Well, it does extend into adolescence.
And once that behavior extends into adolescence, he is then engaged in homosexual conduct, correct?
No, then the term is hebephile.
Then the term is pedophile.
Hebephile.
Okay. What about when his son becomes an adult? What is that called? Homosexual behavior?
Well, the hebephile has a latitude to usually ranges in the teens. I'm not aware that it didn't continue past 18. Still in the teens.
Okay. What is the frequency of someone being a child sexual abuser, a pedophile, and a heterosexual? How often does that occur?
Oh, the mixed categories can occur. Now, what I can't give you is precise definitions or statistics on that. It has been studied in other people's research who really do try to find out truthfully from offenders. This is not easy information to obtain, but there certainly are mixed categories, and they have terms for it.
All right. Of all 3 of those particular incidences, that is the child, the adult, and the heterosexual behavior.
Yes.
Is that common?
Again, I don't know the percentage, but that certainly is reported in the literature. It's not necessarily that uncommon that there'd be a wide range of behaviors aimed at different ages as well as different sexes.
It might be common for him to be a child molester and a heterosexual, correct?
Yes.
And it might be common for him to be a homosexual and a child molester, correct?
Again, you're getting into area that's called same sex and heterosexual. And this is very hard to speculate on without him and having any history on him. We can only look at the behavior that you're describing. So there are those features that you've just described. It's a mixed.
Well, the
group.
behavior is reported by the heterosexual behavior is from people who are either deceased or are not in custody, correct?
The heterosexual behavior, I'm not sure there's been on more than the wife. It's been alluded to,
Yes,
but
Yes.
I'm not aware that somebody has testified to that.
correct. And you have no reason to believe that he did not engage in a heterosexual extramarital affair, correct?
Well, it has been stated that that's what the mother was concerned about.
And the information you received about the pedophilic and the conduct with the adolescent and adult is from Eric Menendez, correct?
That is correct.
Who is incarcerated for murder.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, if a child is sexually abused, does that mean that child can never premeditate?
Premeditate what?
Premeditate a crime such as murder.
Your Honor, this is argument.
Overruled.
Does the fact that you've been sexually abused mean you are unable, with your cognitive skills, to premeditate?
No,
Okay, so people who are sexually abused still have the capacity to plan and execute a murder.
well, you have to see what the circumstances are. Again, you'd have to look at each act to see. I would never make a blanket statement without seeing some facts.
Well, the blanket statement is that people who are sexually abused still may have the capacity to premeditate, correct?
I said yes.
And the sexual abuse does not wipe out their capability to do that, does it?
No.
And sexual abuse can cause anger in abuse victims, can't it?
It's been described as anger at what's being done to them, yes.
Okay, and anger can build up over a period of time, correct?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily always anger. Remember, it can have other elements in it. It isn't, you can never make a causal statement that it will be anger. It depends on the nature of the act.
Dr. Burgess, all I asked you is if anger can be a function of having been sexually abused.
Object to the form of the question is argument.
Re-ask the question, please.
Now, Dr. Burgess, are you an advocate in this case?
No, I don't believe I'm an advocate in this case.
And you're not an advocate for Eric Menendez?
No, I've been called upon to evaluate and render an opinion in this case.
Did you ever contact the prosecution to see if the prosecution had anything to add that you should consider?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that under 115 and other rules. That's an
Overruled.
inappropriate question.
Overruled.
No, I didn't. I didn't realize that that was possible.
But you've testified for the prosecution 20 or 30 times in the past, haven't you?
Yes.
And did you ever ask, gee, should I call the prosecutors and ask them if they have anything to add to my analysis?
But I had so much information from the prosecution. I had all of the grand jury. I felt in the beginning I really had much more from the prosecution statement of case than even from the defense.
Now, you indicated that one of the 5 factors that you consider significant in leading to Eric Menendez's state of mind on the night of the homicide was the triggering event of Eric Menendez's father indicating to him that he would have to stay at home during his tenure at UCLA on occasion.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, you've indicated that you had a lot of material from the prosecution in this case. Is that correct?
I had a lot of material from both sides.
Did you consider the report of a man named Ed Fenno in making that assessment that this was a triggering event?
I'm not getting the relationship. Could you help a little bit more?
Well,
Mr.
I'm going to object to
What?
helping a little bit more, Your Honor. I'd like to approach.
Your Honor, I don't see the necessity to approach. May I
Well,
show
I
her the
see the
report?
necessity.
You can show the witness the report, certainly.
I have here a report.
Let's see what part you want. I'd like to approach on this, Your Honor.
Well, at this point, if this is a report that the witness has seen, she can look at it.
Dr. Burgess, I'm showing you a Beverly Hills Police Department 2-page report. I'm showing you page 2. The report, first of all, the report was prepared on the 4th of June of 1993. Did you receive any police reports after this date?
I'm not sure I got that late reports. I had all the early reports. So I'll have to look at this to see whether I've seen it. Yes,
Have you seen this report?
I think I have.
Okay, and the information contained in the report, did you read it?
Yes,
Did you consider it in your evaluation of item number 1 of the 5 factors that went into Eric Menendez's state of mind?
yes.
And in the report, Mr. Fendo
I'm going to
indicates-
object to any hearsay from the report, Your Honor. I'd like to approach.
All right, you
Offer
may
for-
do so.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
All right, you may proceed.
May I approach again, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you this report again, I'd like to ask you, did you consider this report at all, especially the part that's in yellow? Your Honor, that question has been asked.
Overall.
Yes,
Did you consider that in forming your opinion as to factor number 1?
yes,
And you did consider it.
yes.
Did you reject it?
Well, I don't see it as inconsistent with what my statement is.
All right, well, the fact that Mr. Menendez wanted Eric Menendez to go
Well,
to.
I'm going to object to reading that report because she
Still hasn't indicated that she.
Objection
relied on it.
overruled.
The report indicates that Mr. Fenno was present when Mr. Menendez became upset because Eric Menendez had turned down his acceptance at Berkeley.
Yes.
All right. Now, you didn't consider that significant in assessing Eric Menendez's state of mind.
Well, I don't see where that statement of the father makes is, and it's reported by Mr. Fenno, in any way negates the fact that where he wanted to go to school, where the son wanted to go to school.
Eric Menendez testified, and I assume told you that, I'll return, Your Honor. Eric Menendez testified and told you, I assume, that when his father said he had to stay home a couple of nights a week when he attended UCLA, it was for the purpose of his father continuing the sexual molestation.
Yes.
The fact that his father wanted him to go to school at Berkeley, do you consider that inconsistent with his father's desire to have him stay home to engage in sexual relations?
Well, it doesn't say that his father wasn't happy with him going to UCLA. He makes just that one statement on Berkeley, excuse me, on Berkeley. And he fully intended to go to UCLA and live in the dorm. And that was his wish and his dream and his, that I think is what the important point is that he gets to choose where he wants to go.
Dr. Burgess, Mr. Menendez wanted his son to go to school
I'm
in the
gonna
San Francisco
check
area, according to this report. If this report's true,
Objection to the form of the question is
Exactly.
sustained. It's argumentative. You have to rephrase the question if you want to pursue this.
Dr. Burgess, this particular report indicates, does it not, that Mr. Menendez was upset with Eric for turning down Berkeley?
That's what it says, yes.
And if that is true, that he was upset,
Hmm.
how do you reconcile that with Eric Menendez's statement that his father wanted him to stay home a couple of nights a week while he attended UCLA?
Well, that's a whole different set of circumstances when he's now talking about wanting to go to UCLA and the father gets into going over his courses and all of that. I just don't see those as two. I see them as very separate decisions and statements.
Did you consider in evaluating Mr. Fenno's report that it would be difficult for Mr. Menendez to continue to have sexual relations with his son if his son were 400 miles away?
Yes.
And did you reject that idea?
In that kind of context, yes.
So that the fact that the father wanted his son to go to Berkeley is not inconsistent in your view with Eric Menendez's state of mind that his father wanted him to stay home.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the form of the question.
Sustained.
Okay, now, Dr. Burgess, I believe you indicated that you did examine the medical records of Eric Menendez in order to determine what kinds of childhood traumas he had suffered, correct?
That's correct.
In addition, you looked at the medical records to see, and I believe you even testified, about how Mrs. Menendez reacted or related to the medical professionals or others who were treating her son.
Objection, Your Honor, there's been no such testimony.
Yes, I believe you indicated.
All right, wait, one thing at a time. Objection sustained. You may
And if
rephrase the
counsel's
question.
going to show something to the witness, I'd like to have it
All right.
shown
That's
to
proper.
me. I'm going to object to this document being shown.
All right, first of all, it may be shown to the witness to see whether or not she's seen it, considered it, and relied upon it.
Well, I'm going to ask to approach on this issue because of the preceding question, Your Honor, and because of previous rulings. of the
No,
courts.
it's clearly something that can be, at least at this stage, a foundation established. So I want that to be established first.
Did you review records dealing with treatment of Eric Menendez for speech pathology problems? I'm showing you a letter that's actually a discharge report.
Yes, I know that he had that back in the 70s when he was 8 or 9 years old.
And did you review these records and determine that he did in fact receive speech therapy?
Yes, he did.
And did you ever see this letter, the second page of which contains a statement
I'm
from?
going to object to the reading of.
I'm
the
not
statement.
reading the statement.
All right, let's have the question.
Did you in fact look at this sentence dealing with a statement made by the person who did the treatment?
Yes.
Okay, and in Looking at the information contained therein, did it in any way affect your opinion as to the caregiving nature of Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
And what effect did this have on your opinion?
Well, the effect that had on my opinion is it confirmed that she is both parents are very concerned about how their child presents himself to the outside world, especially that he is able to speak clearly. So I can see that as very compatible with what they would want and that image of the family. So that does not surprise me at all that that statement is in the notes.
The fact that Mrs. Menendez was cooperative.
Yes, that's quite consistent with what I would expect on that particular type of treatment.
Did you ever consider the idea that maybe Mrs. Menendez wanted to get help for her son? Just because she wanted to get help for him?
Well, I think she did want to get help for her son in that particular area, yes.
But I take it you read into it that the help for her son was really for her own self-aggrandizement, correct?
I don't think I said that.
Well, you did say, didn't you, that it was because of how the outside world would view the family.
Yes, and the outside world does look at how a child presents itself, and especially how a child speaks.
You're aware of the fact that he was sent to the Lewis School, correct?
Yes,
You're aware of the fact that he had tutoring when he was at Beverly Hills High School, correct?
yes.
And did you ever consider that perhaps the parents just genuinely cared about their son? Was that ever part of your consideration?
Well, they certainly did care about certain aspects. I don't think I've ever denied that.
I believe you indicated that in your evaluation, Jose Menendez was adept at mind games, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever see any evidence that he had passed that on to his sons?
Karen, I'm gonna check the question.
Rephrase the question.
You indicated that Jose Menendez was adept at mind games, correct?
Yes,
And you're aware of the fact that Jose Menendez continually drilled his children during the course of their youth and adolescence, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. Did you ever consider that Eric Menendez might be playing mind games with you when you interviewed him at the county jail?
Well, that's one of the things that goes into a complete assessment. I mean, all of those factors that we've been talking about, one would try to sift and sort through to see what and why the person is saying what they're saying.
I believe you indicated in your evaluation, one of the things you did is you read the psychotherapeutic notes from Mrs. Menendez's treatment, correct?
That's correct.
And you considered those notes to be very significant.
They're certainly important in terms of her state, her condition at the time that she was in therapy. Yes.
All right, if Mrs. Menendez's psychotherapeutic notes were important as to her state of mind,
Yes.
why didn't you ask Dr. Oziel for his reflections on Eric Menendez's state of mind at or near the time of the killings?
Well, I think I had that information and all the material I looked at. You mean personally call him?
Yes.
No, I felt I had adequate information. Plus, I had already evaluated my opinion on the information I had in terms of notes, etc.
You had already made up your mind.
Well, that's one of the things one does is one goes through information to see to make some type of evaluation of it.
Did you ever consider that the information contained in the notes you did have of Dr. Oziel was in fact true? Did you ever consider that the crime was committed in the way described in Dr. Oziel's notes?
I don't think the crime was committed in the way it was revealed in Dr. Oziel's notes. That's correct.
Why did you reject that?
I rejected that because of the way it was presented. I rejected that because I don't think he was hearing what he was hearing and the way he stated it. These were reconstructed kinds of notes, and I found that very interesting that he didn't have actual notes, so that I really did not find them credible.
But you never even talked to the man, did you?
That's correct, I didn't.
You are familiar with the fact that during their testimony, both of the defendants affirmed that much of what Dr. Oziel testified to was correct.
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Overruled.
Are you familiar with that fact,
And
Dr. Burgess?
Also misstates the testimony.
Overruled.
Yeah, how are you?
Okay, do you want me to rephrase the question?
Yes, please.
When Eric Menendez and his brother Lyle testified,
Yes,
and they were asked specific questions about Dr. Oziel's recitation of those two sessions,
yes.
they affirmed many of the conversations which Dr. Oziel had related to the jury.
Yes, my understanding.
Objection, that's not a question.
Was that in the form of a question?
Yes, I
Did you
should have.
understand it as such?
I think I was going to answer it.
Okay,
Yeah.
then you must have. Go ahead.
My understanding of the testimony is there were parts of it, but certainly not in the way that it was described. And if I remember correctly, there was more disagreeing with statements that came in when Eric Menendez was asked about it than confirming. So I really would rather be a little bit more specific than to make a blanket statement that they affirmed it.
Did you find any instances where they, either one of them in their testimony, affirmed a specific statement of Dr. Oziel?
Yes, they went to see him. They did have meetings with him. I mean, some of those facts they did affirm.
And they also affirmed some of the content of those meetings, correct?
On some of the content, that's correct.
And those were the content which tended to minimize their responsibility for their act, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, that's argumentative at this
Sustained.
stage.
Objection sustained as to the form of the question.
Dr. Burgess, I've asked you previously about the fact that you're familiar with Eric Menendez's, the fact that he acted in some in high school, correct?
My understanding is he took a drama course that was required. Are you referring to something else?
Yes. No, I'm referring to the drama course. You're familiar with the fact that he took drama.
Yes, but it's a required course.
Are you familiar with the fact that he wrote screenplays?
Yes.
Did you consider the screenplays in any of your evaluation of his mental state on the night of August the 20th?
No, I did not.
So you didn't find what he had written to be significant, is that correct?
That is correct.
Turning now to the 5 factors which you say led up to Eric Menendez's state of mind on the night of the killing. And Your Honor, I'm not going to finish before lunch, so
Well, how much longer do you have?
probably 20 minutes.
We'll keep going for a little while.
All right. Turning now to the 5 factors. One of them is that the father had insisted that Eric Menendez continue to live in the home.
Correct.
And you reached this conclusion in spite of the fact that the father had apparently wanted his son to go to Berkeley.
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
You reached this conclusion in spite of the information in the Ed Fenno interview. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, the Ed Fenno interviews asked and answered.
Objection overruled.
Correct?
Yes, correct.
Right. You indicated that one of the second factor was his disclosure of his sexual abuse and suffering to his brother after witnessing his brother's humiliation at the hands of his mother, correct?
That's correct.
Would witnessing that particular event cause these hormones to be triggered in Eric Menendez?
The witnessing of that was certainly an abusive, humiliating act when the hair was literally pulled off. And that certainly did shock, surprise, get a reaction. Whether that was, what it certainly did do was to trigger enough of a response that he did tell his brother about his own abuse by the father.
If someone,
So-
I'm sorry, had you finished?
So in that respect, it certainly did raise something that he had been withholding for a long time to the surface for him to be able to talk about it.
If someone is hypervigilant because of the change in the hormones, wouldn't you expect that that kind of traumatic, assaultive behavior would have triggered this fear response in Eric Menendez the night he saw that occur?
No, not with his brother, no.
So witnessing assaultive behavior is not a cue that would trigger that kind of response?
Well, it's an identification with his brother. He now realizes his brother also was being similarly treated in certain respects, and that would create more of a closeness.
Okay, but in your testimony here today, then, that kind of situation would not trigger this fear response, correct?
There is a cumulative aspect. That in and of itself alone would not. That's correct.
The third factor that you indicated was that Eric Menendez learned that his brother had had a confrontation with the father and what the father had said during that confrontation, correct?
Yes, correct.
Would that recitation by Lyle Menendez to his brother be the kind of thing that would trigger his fear hormones to respond?
Yes, because that did have more threats. I mean, threats were implied, and that is what would be a more important factor in terms of raising one's anxiety and fear level, yes.
All right. And in addition to that, the next factor is the fact that that same night, he claims that his father came to his room and came inside and physically assaulted him. Correct?
On that night,
Thursday night.
that is where he resists and is able to flee. That's the important part of that. His
And you-
behavior does change from just complying.
So at that point, he was aware of the fact that he could resist and be successful, correct?
Well, he now had an ally. He now had somebody he could go to, and that's who he does directly go to, someone that he does feel is going to protect him.
But his brother wasn't with him when his father came into the room, according to him, correct?
That's right.
And you would expect then that at that particular point in time, his fear response was in full alert, correct?
Well, yes, he does make flight.
And he goes to his brother, is that correct?
Yes.
You're aware of the fact that there is no indication that Mr. Menendez pursued him anywhere, correct?
Correct?
You're aware of the fact that there was a maid living in the house that night.
Well, I'm going to object, Your Honor. That has not been established.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
You're aware of the fact that are you aware of the fact that there were other people living in the house that night?
Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence there are other people.
I am not aware of any. I know that there was stated that there was a maid present who lived there, but I do not know whether she was there at that time.
Okay, well, are you aware of the testimony that Eric Menendez gave, the statement that Eric Menendez gave to the police on September the 17th of 1989 in Princeton, New Jersey?
Yes.
Okay, and are you aware during that statement there's discussion of the fact that the maid had Fridays through Sundays off?
Yes.
Okay. Have you read any reports from the maid as to her recollection of the week in question?
I don't believe so.
Now then, I believe you've indicated that the other event that was significant to you was the mother revealing her knowledge of the abuse and then blaming her sons, correct?
Correct.
Now, would that revelation by the mother trigger these hormones, this fear response?
Yes, that was a very important part of all of this because much of his behavior up until that point had been geared toward protecting and staying with the mother, etc. And here he now realizes that she has known, not only has known, but has taken no steps to protect him, and even then goes and blames her sons for the family's problems.
If that's true, then that's significant, correct?
If it's true that the family had problems?
No, if this
Oh.
fact is true that the mother actually said these things, then it's significant, correct?
Yes,
And the information you got in that regard is from Eric Menendez, correct?
that is correct.
Now, I believe you've indicated then that this was a cue sufficient to trigger the fear response. Is that
Yes.
correct?
The cumulative, those 5 factors.
Okay. Well, these 5 factors occurred over a period of several days, correct?
Correct.
Was he in a constant state of fear response during that period of time?
He was highly anxious. He had the hypervigilance. He was anxious. He was having difficulty sleeping. There are other facets of a aroused state.
Would difficulty in sleeping be consistent with someone who was planning to murder their parents?
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
I'm not aware of sleep patterns in that. I
You
don't
haven't-
think that. I mean, if somebody has a plan and is going to carry it out and is very calm and collected about it, I would think they'd be able to sleep very well.
You do?
If they had it all planned out. But again, I don't know any studies that have been looking at the sleeping patterns of people who plan.
Okay, so there are no psychological studies in existence right now mapping out the sleep patterns of premeditated murderers, correct?
Well, I think that the information or the research does show that they tend to be pretty calm, pretty collected, pretty organized.
So the only kind of premeditated murder there is someone who is cold-blooded, is that correct?
It generally means planning and organization. I know that that's a legal word, premeditation, but it generally means being able to have high thinking. You've got to have low emotion.
Okay, so if you're emotional, then you can't premeditate. Would that be your testimony?
Well, Your Honor, I think these questions are really improper from a legal standpoint.
Yes, the term premeditation is a legal term, and the court will define that for the jury at the appropriate time at the end of the trial, and this witness is not the source of such a definition. Your next question.
If you're emotional, then does that mean you can't plan?
It depends what you're planning.
Now, did you consider the incident that occurred on Saturday night as related to you by Eric Menendez with his father pounding at the door where Eric was armed with a gun? Did you-
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't put that into your factors here. This wasn't factor number 6. Is there a reason for that?
That was not one of the critical factors because the father didn't get in.
Okay. So you're telling me that when Eric Menendez relates that his father was pounding at the door and Eric Menendez had the shotgun and it was pointed it at the door,
Mhm.
that wasn't significant?
Well, we can add it. I mean, it certainly was part of the total picture from Thursday on through Sunday. I mean, that is one additional aspect to it.
Now, if it were true that this event occurred on Saturday night where the father was pounding at the door and Eric Menendez was armed with a shotgun, wouldn't you expect his fear hormones to be in full stampede?
Well, this is getting pretty close to Sunday.
No, I'm talking about Saturday night. You've outlined these events that occurred starting with Tuesday when the mother pulled the hairpiece off her son.
That's right.
Okay, and you've talked about this buildup, correct?
That's correct.
You've talked about events up to Saturday, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't you consider it significant that this event occurred on Saturday night where his father was pounding at his door and he, for once, was armed with a shotgun which was loaded?
To protect himself. That's correct.
All right. Now, if in fact he was suffering from all this hypervigilance during the week, why
Yes.
didn't he shoot his father then?
Well, he thought about that, but the door is shut and the door is locked. And as long as the father doesn't come in, he also only had 2 shells, as I remember correctly.
But Dr. Burgess, you said that when a person goes into this automatic fear, biological, recoded genes response, that person acts automatically.
That's correct.
Okay. And if Eric Menendez was assaulted, or if Eric Menendez was in the situation he described on that Saturday night, he would have been in the full automatic fear response based upon your evaluation of him, wouldn't he?
Yes, and I said there's a cumulative effect so that you have to look at all of those days. And if you want to add that, we can make it a 6th point. Yes, that's a very important factor.
Wasn't his father pounding on the door more threatening than his father closing the den door the next day?
Oh, no, because the word had already been told. He was supposed to go up to his room and then the father would come up and see him there. And that's a more specific clue that of something that's going to happen. And that's really what generates the what happens on Sunday evening, later that evening.
You're saying that his father saying, go to your room, was more of a threat than his father standing at the door trying to pound the door down. You're saying that was more of a threat, the go to your room versus let me into your room?
Well, the door was locked. He had the gun.
Dr. Burgess,
Don't forget he had, no, I'm not going to,
Excuse me, can perhaps counsel allow the witness to answer the question?
Yes, did you finish
Yeah.
your answer?
yes, I think I have.
Your next question.
How do you explain this incident on Saturday night? How do you explain the fact that okay, let me back up.
Okay.
He would have been in the fear response because his father is pounding down the door,
I'm
correct?
going to object to the form of the question. I think the door was coming off the hinges just yet.
All right, overruled as to the form of the question.
Your Honor, I still have a ways to go. Should we break for lunch?
No, let's keep going a little.
Okay. Okay. On Saturday night, according to Eric Menendez, he has gone out and bought a shotgun, and he's gone out and he's bought stronger ammunition, correct?
Correct.
He's got a loaded gun in his bedroom, which he secreted somewhere on his bed, correct?
Correct.
His father, who he allegedly believes to be a child molester, is pounding at the door, correct?
I've got to object to the form of the question. It's argumentative.
All right, if you've got to, then you will. Is that right?
No, I don't always.
All right, the objection is sustained as to the form of the question. You may rephrase it. If you want to break it down so that you aren't summarizing evidence.
Okay. According to his testimony, he's in his room, correct?
That's
I'm gonna
correct.
object to the form of the question based on testimony.
Overruled.
You read his testimony, didn't you?
Yes.
Did you see any of his testimony?
Yes, I did. I think I saw the cross exam.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the events of Saturday night where he has a gun and his father is beating on the door, correct?
Yes.
We're talking about that event, correct?
Yes.
You've indicated that he's hypervigilant all week, correct?
Yes.
We know, according to what you've said, that on Thursday night, his father chased him in his own bedroom, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then on Saturday night, this incident occurs where the father pounds on the door
Yes,
and Eric Menendez is armed,
yes,
would you consider arming oneself with a loaded shotgun to be a stressful event?
well, it's for self-protection, so that certainly is a stressful event, yes.
All right. Would you consider a father who you believe to be a child molester pounding on your bedroom door to be a stressful event?
Yes,
So he would have been under a lot of stress.
yes,
And even if none of the events of the week before had happened, that particular event would have been stressful, right?
yes. Oh, never mind, sorry. Yes,
Is that correct?
yes, correct.
Is there any reason that he would not have been in this full fear response at that time?
No,
So he would have been.
yes,
Okay. And I believe it was your testimony that when one is in that particular response, one reacts automatically.
that's correct.
But you indicated that Eric Menendez would have known or would have thought about the fact that his gun only had 2 rounds and things of that nature, correct?
Well, he's sitting there with a gun and he knows it has 2 rounds, and he's actually thinking if his father comes in, he is going to have to shoot, and will 2 rounds or 2 shells be adequate to protect himself?
So in spite of the fact that he's in this full fear response, it's your testimony that he would have had the capacity to think about the weapon available to him and whether or not it would kill.
Well, he has it, and he is sitting there, as you describe. He is sitting there, and he is prepared to use it to defend himself if anything further happens with that door.
And if he's thinking about the number of rounds in his weapon, is he engaging in cognitive behavior?
Yes, he's sitting right there, and he's very focused in on one particular point, and that's to protect himself.
Now, the snails that you talked about who reacted to this impulse did not have cognitive behavior available to them, correct? Snails can't think.
That's correct.
All right. And I believe that the research that substantiates this neurobiological genetic recoding is based in part upon these snails.
That's one of these groups that they've studied. That's correct.
And I believe in your direct examination, you testified that the brainstem, which controls this kind of automatic behavior, is similar in humans as it is in snails.
Yes, this one particular area, correct.
And it was based upon that research that you hypothesized that Eric Menendez and others similarly situated would have this fear response, correct?
Yes,
Now, I believe you testified, did you not, in direct examination, that the fear response puts the individual on something akin to automatic pilot.
that's right. Yes.
Automatic pilot. Now, does that occur in the snail as well as the human?
You can't look at behavior in snails. Well, they avoid. They were studying the avoiding behavior. Remember, getting away from the dangerous stimuli.
So what you're testifying to now then is that even though he would have been in this full fear response with the adrenaline pumping and his hormones going,
Yes.
that he would have had the ability to think.
Well, the thinking is he's on automatic. If that his thought is if that door opens, he is going to shoot to protect himself. I see that as a automatic kind of one singular thought.
But he's not thinking. He's on automatic pilot.
Well, the thinking, we said it's high emotion, low thinking. It doesn't mean zero thinking. It goes into a more automatic protective mode. People do, when they are threatened, still behave and still act as best they can, even though there's high emotion. I mean, we'll go back to that car. People do try to do things to avoid a car accident. They don't just stop thinking.
Why would the events of the father closing the door to the den on Sunday night be more provocative than the father pounding on the door on Saturday night?
Because it's more characteristic for this family to be silent, to give an order, to shut the door, and that was an important factor added to what we've already talked about on these other factors.
But I think you testified that when things are not characteristic, that they create a heightened sense of hypervigilance. In other words, when things are not always as they seem, that causes stress to the individual who is subject to this phenomena you've described.
Yeah, well, they don't know what is going to be discussed within what is going to go on. All they have is the instructions to get up to your room and he will deal with him later.
Okay, so if the father has not previously pounded on the door, that would be something new that would cause additional stress, correct?
Well, that had already occurred and that had already heightened that whole phenomenon. That had just happened the night before.
Isn't one of the things you consider in this particular assessment, and one of the things you found significant, is that the behavior of the parents had changed? and that change in behavior caused extra stress.
Yes, that's the cumulative aspect. We've looked at this as the person, as Eric Menendez, going into a more crisis kind of situation because there was new factors. All of these things that had occurred. And so there was call for new behavior.
But I think what you said was significant about closing the door on Sunday night was that it's something that had happened before. So which is it, Dr. Burgess? Is it something that happened before or the new experience, which is the greater stressor to the individual?
Objection argumentative.
I believe that you never can get away from old cues as well as new cues. So you have to be able to factor in those. And so some of the old cues is the shutting the door, the being silent, et cetera. But the new cues is what we have just gone through in these 5 or 6 items. So that interfaces those all. It isn't like it's a brand new situation. You have special knowledge of a situation in which parents have behaved in a way before. That still is part of one's fund of knowledge.
Now, on the night in question, oh, by the way, I have another question. You're familiar with the fact that Eric Menendez, when he moved out of the family home and got his own place, took his bed with him?
Yes.
Did you
I am.
consider that significant in light of the fact that he claims that is the bed where his father sexually abused him?
My understanding is he did put additional factors on. This was a bed that where the sexual abuse occurred. There were corners and sharp corners and so forth. And so he changed the bed, if you will, with those, I guess, bumpers that were bought. And this was, and I'm aware of that this was now a different, if you will. It had been changed.
Because of the presence of bumpers.
Well,
Is
there
that
were
correct?
sharp edges. I don't understand. I have not seen the bed, but that's my understanding of the testimony.
Do you see anything inconsistent with a child abuse victim taking the bed, which is the scene of the crime, with him to a place of safety as a memento? Do you find that at all
Your
inconsistent?
Honor, I'm going to object to the form of the question since it's got many facts not in evidence.
Furniture had to be taken to set up a new place. I don't see that necessarily inconsistent.
Are you
As I
aware?
said, there's been change made to it.
Are you aware of the testimony of Eric Menendez's Aunt Marta, that she went shopping with him for furniture, and in fact, one of the things he bought was a pool table, correct?
I believe so.
And those were expensive items of furniture, correct?
That is correct.
And so it wasn't for lack of funds that he took the bed with him, correct?
Well, it could have been to conserve money. I have no idea. I did not talk to him about why he took certain items with him.
Do you think it's more important to have a pool table or a bed to sleep in?
Your Honor, I'm going to
Dr.
object
Burgess?
to that.
So you didn't see anything unusual about the fact that Eric Menendez took this bed with him when he moved out, correct? You didn't see that as unusual?
Not necessarily, no.
Shall I continue? All right, does the court wish me to finish before we go to lunch? Okay, I shall continue. Now, Dr. Burgess, if Eric Menendez and his brother could not have gone to the movie theater and could not have purchased the tickets the way they said and buried the guns and changed their clothes and gone to Santa Monica Civic in the period of time available, would that change your opinion about the truthfulness of the information you've received from Eric Menendez?
No.
It would not?
No, the time between, is this the time? Repeat the question. Is it the time? Yeah, I thought we.
Between 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. and 11:07 are
Yes.
the times that are critical to post-crime activity, correct?
Yes, correct.
If all of the things that the Menendez brothers said they did could not be achieved in that period of time, would it
Right.
change your opinion as to the truthfulness of the information given to you by Eric Menendez?
I think I've said that is one of the factors I looked at in terms of what you're calling their activity, their post-crime activity. If that just didn't work.
What didn't
The
work?
time element, well, the going to the movie, the meeting of the friend, the trying to go to the second place. I think there are 2 places that they went to. That didn't happen, and then they come back.
What do you mean?
What do you mean by your question?
Yeah,
I don't understand her answer. Okay, are
I
you
didn't
saying,
understand
okay,
your question.
all
Why
right.
don't you rephrase it then?
You heard or you read the testimony of Eric Menendez and his brother that after this crime that they committed out of fear,
Yes,
that they went and picked up the shells, correct?
correct.
And that took a period of time, correct?
I assume. Nobody's given me how long it took, but I
Well-
assume it took time.
And you're aware of the fact that they waited for a period of time before they picked up the shells, correct?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And you're aware of the fact, now, I believe you testified in your crime scene evaluation that there would have been blood on the perpetrators, correct?
One would suspect that given the amount of blood that was present, yes.
And have you looked at the blood splatter evidence at the crime scene as well?
Yes,
Okay, and would the head wound to Jose Menendez have caused splatter on the person who inflicted that wound?
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. There really hasn't been adequate foundation for her expertise in blood splatter.
All right, well, she has certainly used that as a basis of her opinion or part of it, so objection overruled. Objection overruled.
You understand there are people, Dr. Burgess, who are experts in blood splatter, correct?
yes,
And you are not one of those.
that's correct.
But regardless of where the drops went and what direction they went, would you assume that someone who inflicted the wound to the back of Mr. Menendez's head would have gotten blood on them?
Well, objection, Your Honor, that is not regardless of where it goes, but depending on that expertise, and she's not an expert.
Well, she has certainly described the presence or absence of splatters as a factor she considered in this subject of planning, so objection overruled. Objection overruled.
What I would say is I'm not sure where and what wound would have given what blood splatter, but generally that much blood present at the scene would suggest that there's going to be some blood obtained on person's clothing, shoes, etc.
And you're aware of the testimony that in fact, each of the defendants changed at least an article of clothing after the killings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that changing the article of clothing took a period of time to accomplish.
Yes,
You're aware of the fact that they indicated that they went to the movie theater first in order to obtain tickets to substantiate where they were.
I'm aware they went to the movie theater yes, they went to the movie theater. I'm not sure to obtain tickets.
Well,
Yes.
did you read the testimony?
Yes, that's right. They went to the movie theater.
And you're familiar with the fact that Lyle Menendez said they parked at parking meters outside of Century City, correct?
Yes,
All right. Now, you're aware of the fact that after they got the tickets, they went up to an area at Mulholland and Coldwater, and they got rid of the guns.
yes, I'm familiar with that testimony.
And you're aware of the fact that it would take a period of time to secrete the guns the way it was described by the defendants.
Objection on falsehood, speculation, authority.
Sustained.
You're aware of the fact that getting rid of guns would take a period of time.
Yes, yes,
And you're aware of the fact that they then returned into the Beverly Hills area and proceeded to the Santa Monica Civic.
yes, I am.
And you're aware of the fact that at least one of the brothers indicates that they changed their clothes beforehand.
Yes,
Okay. Now, if one had blood on them and one were going to meet someone like Perry Berman, you wouldn't want to have blood on your clothes when you met Perry Berman, correct?
Your Honor, all opinions.
Sustained.
Would a careful person who was trying to perfect an alibi show up at a place to be identified with blood on his clothes?
Your Honor, I'm still going to object.
Sustained.
So you're aware of the fact that they went to Santa Monica, is that correct?
yes, I am.
Did you ever think to yourself, gee, I wonder if they could have done that in an hour and 7 minutes?
Overruled.
Did you ever think to yourself,
I did not look at the time it would take to drive all that places, and I didn't see any documentation of how long the houses are away from these sites that they went to. I
Did you ever-
don't have that.
did you ever ask anyone to see if it was possible before you decided that Eric Menendez was telling the truth?
Well, sometimes it's included in a police report, that kind of information, or testified to a grand jury or something. I just did not find that material.
Did you ever ask anyone to provide you with that information so you could assess whether or not Eric Menendez was telling the truth?
Telling the truth? No, I did not ask anyone for that information.
Now, it's your testimony that this crime was a result of fear, correct?
That's correct.
And are you familiar with the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he acted out of fear as well?
Yes, I am.
And I take it you don't find any inconsistency in the fact that although the brothers had different experiences growing up, they both were in this fear response. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, when they went in and they picked up the shells, excuse me, when they went out and they reloaded the gun, when Lyle went out to reload the gun,
Yes.
was he in that fear response when he reloaded?
He was in a state of high emotion. Yes.
Well, is there?
Well, fear. All right. Yes. Fear response.
Was he having this biological phenomena that you described that happens in these snails, in your opinion?
Overall.
He is in a highly anxious state and a fearful state. Yes.
Okay, well, okay, for purposes of this discussion that we're going to have now, how do you describe this response where someone is acting on automatic pilot?
Right. The
What do
way
you
I-
call it? What shall we call it?
Well, it's an automatic response. And the point here is there's such high emotion that that was not a needed behavior. That was not necessary. If that had been a very planned, if this had had a plan and had been very, as we call, organized, that would not have had to happen.
But do you remember the testimony of Lyle Menendez that his mother was still sneaking around the room even after she'd been shot?
Rephrase the question.
Do you remember the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he saw his mother sneaking around the coffee table?
Rephrase the question.
Do you remember the testimony of Lyle Menendez in which he described his mother's behavior as being sneaky? Remember that testimony?
Not as sneaky, no.
You don't
I
remember?
remember a noise, but I don't remember sneaky.
Now you say that that last shot was not necessary.
Correct.
Okay. You're familiar with the fact that Lyle Menendez indicates he only reloaded one shot of birdshot, correct?
Correct.
You're familiar with the coroner's report that there were two birdshot wounds, two separate birdshot wounds to Mrs. Menendez.
Yes.
Okay. How do you reconcile that with his testimony that he only reloaded once?
Well, again, this is the mixed ammunition that's found at the crime scene, and that really doesn't tell us whose gun had what shells in it, and really speaks to, I believe, to more emotionality in terms of loading the gun and doing that. I don't think we can tell who had what shot.
When the brothers went out to the car to reload before the shooting began, were they on automatic pilot?
Overall.
Yes.
They were on automatic.
Well, they were on a, yes, they were in a fear mode, yes.
All right. And when they were in this fear mode, they were able to think, gee, I better get these 2 rounds of birdshot out of here and put in these rounds of buckshot so I can do a better job. Is that what was going on?
No, that's not what I think is going on.
How can behavior such as loading and unloading a shotgun be automatic to someone who's not done it before?
Because, well, they had done it to load first. I mean, it's not like they had never done it. They had to load the guns first. So I don't see that as not knowing how to load a gun.
So the fact that they loaded the shotgun on one prior occasion meant that this particular behavior was automatic for them. Is that correct?
Well, what becomes automatic is the high emotion and the misunderstanding what the situation is. They had not planned it to know that they didn't need to do all of this to, if indeed it was a plan, as you suggest, to do that. They didn't need to do all of that.
But this is Monday morning quarterbacking, isn't it? For you to sit here and say what they should have done.
No,
years
this is
ago?
looking at crime scene.
Overall.
No, this is what is called crime scene, looking at the crime scene. I don't think you need to get into Monday at this particular time to read that crime scene for the preliminary crime scene in terms of the number of weapons, the number of injuries, etc.
Did you consider the possibility that the crime did not occur the way that the defendants thought it would?
I considered all kinds of things when I listened to all the material, and I sifted and sorted and looked at as many things as I possibly could. I did not go in with one particular point of view.
And then they were on automatic pilot after they loaded their guns and went back into the room, correct?
Oh,
Yes, as to
Yes.
which
I'm
reloading
sorry.
you're talking
I'm
about.
talking about the reloading that occurred prior to the shootings, not after the shootings. They were on automatic pilot when they went back in. Is that correct?
when they went back in the second time.
Yes.
Ye-
No, I'm sorry.
Uh,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Why don't you rephrase the question as to the incident where the guns were reloaded first or second?
When the defendants loaded their guns with buckshot, and went into the room to kill their parents. I take it as your testimony that they were on automatic pilot.
Yes,
And when they left that room and returned to the car in order to reload with birdshot, they were on automatic pilot.
Rephrase the question.
When Eric Menendez and his brother went to the car and Eric handed his brother around a birdshot,
yes,
they were both on automatic pilot. Is that correct?
yes,
And when they returned to the room and Lyle Menendez put the muzzle of the gun up against his mother's cheek, they were still on automatic pilot. Is that correct?
Objection overruled.
yeah.
Objection overruled.
My understanding of the coroner's report is that you cannot determine exactly where a gun is necessarily having a particular point, that you couldn't determine that from the crime scene.
Do you know
It's
what
not-
a contact wound is, Dr. Burgess?
Yes, I do.
A contact wound is when the muzzle of the gun is placed on the skin, correct?
Near,
Rephrase the question.
Okay, Dr. Burgess, what is a contact wound?
my understanding of a contact wound is that the gun muzzle is placed very close to a particular part.
Are you familiar with the coroner's testimony in this case, as well as the coroner's report, wherein, as to Mr. Menendez's contact wound on the back of his head, there was actually a muzzle impression? Are you familiar with that testimony?
Yes,
Okay, so that would have been a contact wound where the gun was actually touching the skin.
yes.
And are you familiar with the coroner's testimony, as well as his report, that there was no soot or stippling on the outside of the wound on Mrs. Menendez's left cheek?
That's correct.
Okay, and the absence of soot or stippling would indicate that the muzzle of the gun was on the cheek, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, it also goes beyond this witness's
Yeah.
expertise. Objection sustained.
Well, all right, but you just testified as to what you think a contact wound is, correct?
That-
Overruled.
Yeah, that was my, and again, I'm not an expert in gunshot wounds.
Now, if it's been established through the testimony of the coroner and also through the testimony of Lyle Menendez that he went back in and put the muzzle up against his mother's cheek and pulled the trigger, was he on automatic pilot when he did that?
Overruled.
Was he on automatic pilot when he did that?
He's on automatic pilot when he's doing what he's doing. There's high emotionality, low thinking.
And when he and his brother went back into the room to pick up the shells, they were still on automatic pilot?
Well, now that gets into another phase, and I think we've already talked about that. That's what the post-crime behavior is. And there is a segment of time that you now need to get, I think, needs to come in terms of afterwards, in the foyer, all of that, and waiting for the police to come. That's an important piece.
Do you find it at all interesting that if in fact these two brothers were acting out of fear, that they had the presence of mind within 5 to 10 minutes of doing this crime to go back in their room and pick up shotgun shells to eliminate fingerprints?
Well, I think that that is part of what happens as they're sitting in the foyer to try. It's a whole nother phase. They did not anticipate having to plan that or to do, to use, or to what to do afterwards, because they fully expected that the police would show. That the noise and all of that, that had not in any way been part of their thinking. Now they are faced with having to do something, and they are faced with what they did. And so the behavior now becomes focused on a different aspect.
At which point in the sequence did the automatic pilot fear response turn off?
Well, there's still it doesn't just go on and off like a switch. There certainly is a length of time, and that's certainly what all the studies have shown. So that's not that they're actually still on or still off, but they're in a highly aroused state in terms of fear.
Do you find it at all significant that they had the presence of mind when acting in this fear response to go back and to think of, oh gee, there are fingerprints on those shells, we better go get them? Did you find that at all unusual?
No,
Why not?
because there can be another explanation for it. They were now thinking of what had happened, and to remove that is another action.
There's another explanation for it as well, isn't there, Dr. Burgess?
Overruled.
The other explanation is that they planned before the crime to pick up the shells.
Well, that is your theory. That's not what I think. I read the crime scene, and I think there's far more information that follows, that confirms their lack of planning and their intent to protect themselves.
All right,
Okay.
let's take our recess here and we'll resume at 1:30. Don't discuss this matter with anyone.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
All right, you may continue your cross-examination.
Dr. Burgess, did you ever discuss Dr. Oziel's notes with Eric Menendez?
No, I did not.
In your review of Dr. Oziel's notes, did you ever see any reference to the term sociopath?
Objection, Your Honor, ask to approach.
Overruled.
I believe there was a reference to that, yes.
Do you know what
I
a,
would ask to approach, Your Honor, for some notion of what counsel is asking about.
Or you're going to refer to the testimony?
that was a preparatory question. I just have a couple questions in
All
this
right,
area.
there's no need to approach.
Did you ever consider the possibility that Eric Menendez was a sociopath?
I considered all possibilities, looking at all of the data and reviewing everything. So within that framework, I would have to say I considered everything, but I ruled certain things out.
What is your understanding of what a sociopath is?
Your Honor, I'm here to object. There's no foundation.
Sustained.
I believe you've indicated that one of the that there are two responses to this automatic fear response. One is flight and one is fright. Excuse me, fight.
Yes.
Correct?
And there's freeze.
Oh, there's a third one?
Well, there's the numbing, the third, the freezing, the numbing, the three parts, preparatory, then the fight, flight, and then it goes into the third phase of the numbing, freezing.
Okay, but I'm talking about the second phase.
Okay, fight,
Okay.
flight, yes.
The second phase is fight or flee.
Well, don't forget, sometimes you can do neither.
All right, now on Thursday night of the week in question, which was the 17th of August of 1989, you've related an incident in which Eric Menendez was able to flee from his father, correct?
Yes,
And that would be an example of the fear response kicking in, and he chose flight, and in fact was successful at it.
yes,
On Saturday night, when his father was pounding at the door and he was armed with a shotgun,
yes,
he couldn't flee because he was in a locked room, correct?
that's correct.
But he didn't fight.
That's correct.
Okay. Was that a conscious choice on his part, or was that an automatic response?
That's actually a good example of freezing, because he did have a choice of shooting.
Okay, so even though he was in this automatic mode, he still had choice available.
Yes.
So does that mean we're not like snails in that regard?
I really don't think we can make any analogy to snails. Snails is one example of the genetic recoding. So I'm not prepared to talk about what making the analogy to snails when we're talking about human behavior.
Dr. Burgess, you brought up in your direct examination the research on the snails, which
Yes,
was used in order to substantiate this genetic recoding, correct?
I just said that's one of the studies that they have done that's looking at the genetic recoding.
And one of the things that goes on in that genetic recoding is that the mechanism for triggering the hormones is either shortened or hypersensitized or something like that,
No,
right?
It recodes and it has a new translation and it recodes in terms of survival. So there now is a higher level, and that's the higher Q reading for the survival mode.
And on Saturday night, when Eric Menendez's father was pounding at the door and he was armed with a loaded shotgun, he would have been in this mode where his fear hormones were triggered, correct?
That's correct.
And he did not fight.
He did not fight. He did not flee. He froze.
He couldn't flee because he was in a locked room.
Yes.
And he was on the second story of a building.
Well,
Correct.
he could have gotten up and unlocked the door.
And that would have been a fight response.
Well, that would be one example, yes. Or he could have shot.
And that would be a fight response.
Yes.
And the flight response wouldn't be reasonable because he was in a locked room and the only avenue of safe escape was through past his father, who was pounding on the door, correct?
Yes,
Now, on Sunday, then, he chose, in your interpretation, the fight response.
yes.
Can you explain why on Thursday and Saturday he didn't choose the fight response, but on Sunday he did?
Well, there is that interaction that has occurred just before the parents go in, and that's been testified to, I believe, by both defendants. And that's where there is the exchange. The brothers are told they're not to leave, and that Eric is told to go to his room, and then the parents go into the family room. So there is, what I'm saying is there's another added piece to this five steps that have occurred before that.
Now, I believe we discussed earlier the fact that the cue of closing the door and going into the den is something that you believe was a triggering cue. Would that be fair to say?
Well, that's an old cue.
Well, how is that an old?
Prior.
Okay, how
The
is that?
silence, the not just giving the order, dismissing the persons and leaving the room.
On prior occasions when that particular cue had been given, had Eric Menendez's life been in danger?
Well, that's a cue that is into a wider type of situation now, where many examples have been given about how Jose Menendez would stop a conversation with just a mere cut of his hand or use of his hand or a look.
Stopping a conversation is not a life-threatening act, is it?
I was just giving you some examples.
Okay, but my question is this. Is there any evidence that on prior occasions when a door had been closed in the same manner in which it was on Sunday night, that Eric Menendez's life had been in danger?
Well, what is important about the four or 5 days that we're talking about is that there's a direct threat. The incest secret is about to come out as perceived by that confrontation. So things are quite different. And I think you have to look at that type of material within the new context.
According to the testimony, the incest secret was revealed on Thursday night,
That's
correct?
correct.
And that would have greatly increased Eric Menendez's anxiety, correct?
That is correct.
And then Saturday night, the father is pounding at the door, correct?
Yes, there's also the fishing trip before that.
Oh, the fishing trip. Did you find any significance in the fishing trip?
Yes, I think the fishing trip did have significance in terms of the time change without very adequate kind of explanation. They were just told, and in fact, they did try to avoid that by coming home late. There is testimony that shows that the family was about an hour and a half late, supposed to be there, I think, at 3, and they weren't there until 4:30. So that the parents waited for their sons was a factor.
The fact that the parents waited for their sons to go on a family outing, you found to be suspicious?
Yes, because the sons did not want to go, and they were trying to come in late so that they wouldn't have to go.
But the parents didn't know the sons didn't want to go on the fishing trip. So how does their waiting for their sons, how does that trigger their sons that something's wrong?
Well, I think it's a good example of no communication. I mean, nobody's talking to each other. That's another important feature of this family at this particular point in time.
Okay, now the fact that the mother told them on Friday night that there's been a change in the time that we're going on the fishing trip, that has psychological significance in this chain of events, correct?
Yes, it has meaning in this, yes, in this chain of events.
And what is the meaning of that?
Well, the meaning of this is that she just gives this fact that it's going to be a change in time with minimal explanation, if any, and no questions are asked, nothing, and the sons are just supposed to show up at 3 o'clock on Saturday. And they haven't been told a lot of information about this shark fishing trip. And they're wondering if that might be a time when something dangerous is going to happen. They are geared for something dangerous to happen because there has been this confrontation between the father and the son.
I think the fact that they were going to fish for sharks was a cue to them to be in danger.
Well, I think the fact is that they were all going to be together and they didn't know when and what. The father was not known for revealing what he intended to do. That was a characteristic of the father.
Well, on Thursday night, Eric Menendez had fled. On Saturday night, Eric Menendez chose not to fight. They didn't have to go on the fishing trip, did they?
They didn't have to go.
And all they had to do was
They intended not to go.
All they had to do is drive around the block and wait for their parents to leave, and then they wouldn't have gone on the fishing trip, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, argument.
Overruled.
They
Correct?
waited an hour and a half before they came home so they wouldn't have to go.
And you found it very ominous that the parents waited for them to go on a family outing.
I don't believe I said that.
Well, what psychological significance did you attach to the fact that the parents waited for them to go on a family outing?
You rejected the characterization. No one testified this was a family outing.
Overruled.
What I found significant is that there was a whole lack of communication about this, that the parents did wait for the sons. This was supposed to be, as I understood it from the testimony from the captain, that the father was to learn this shark fishing for a client. So it was not necessarily in the context of that the family had to all be there. He could have learned this without the sons being there.
Is there anything that happened between Tuesday the 15th and Sunday the 20th, which is inconsistent with your theory, which you consider to be inconsistent with your theory that this is a crime born out of fear?
No, this is my opinion. This is a crime born out of fear.
And there's no fact that you have considered and found to be in conflict with your theory about the fear?
Well, I think what we are not looking at is there still is a lot more material that also leads me to this conclusion that I think is very important to look at.
Now, when the brothers went to the car and they ejected the shells they previously put in the bird shot and they loaded with buckshot, I believe before lunch we discussed that that was an automatic response, correct?
Yes.
Now, have you ever done any studies of police shootings?
I've read studies of police shootings. I have not personally done any.
Police officers are trained in handling their weapons, correct?
That is correct.
Police officers are trained to reload.
Yes.
Police officers are trained more than just loading their weapon one time before they're sent out to use it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So a police officer's training would be greater than what the defendants claim they did in regard to the shotguns they purchased on Friday, correct?
All right. Yes.
You're aware of the fact that in stressful situations, police officers don't always respond to their training in regards to handling their firearms, correct?
Yes, that's the more high emotion and low thinking. That can always happen in any situation.
And so I would take it that in spite of all the planning that the police officer does and how to handle his gun and how to reload, that the stress of the situation can make the best plan go awry.
That's training. Training is something that you're automatically are able to put your behavior into action around a specific event, whether that is loading your gun and shooting, or you could use other examples. I mean, training is to make that come automatic to you.
You have no evidence that either Eric Menendez or Lyle Menendez were trained in the use of a shotgun, correct?
That's correct.
But although they had no training, it's your testimony that when they loaded the gun from birdshot to buckshot, that was an automatic response.
That is correct.
Now, you're aware of the fact that loading the shotgun with 3 rounds is different from loading the shotgun with 6 rounds. Are you familiar with the testimony of Deputy Van Horn from the Sheriff's Department in this trial?
I thought it was 5 rounds, but yes.
No, it's 6.
It's 6
According to
rounds.
the testimony of Mr. Van Horn, it was 6 rounds.
Yes, what it
Yeah.
means, how many can be fit into the weapon, or
Yes.
what do you mean?
You're familiar with the fact that according to the testimony of the defendants, they only loaded 2 rounds into their shotguns after they purchased them in San Diego on Friday night.
Correct.
And those rounds were birdshot.
Correct.
And you're aware that there's a mechanism necessary to eject already loaded rounds from the gun if you don't fire them out the barrel, correct?
Yes.
And you have no indication that these defendants had any training in doing that particular function, that is unloading the gun.
That's correct.
And you had no information that they had any training in fully loading the gun with 6 rounds.
Objection, no testimony that.
Overall.
I don't have any information on, I mean, I have no knowledge that they had that training.
In examining the crime scene, did you ever count up the number of shots that you think were fired?
Well, I read the coroner's report and I read the police reports. I was not personally at the crime scene. So I only have that information to go on.
If you were not personally at the crime scene, how can you testify that the crime scene was disorganized?
Be-
Objection, Your Honor, this has been asked and answered, gone over.
Right, the objection is sustained.
Dr. Burgess, you don't need to be at the crime scene in order to look at photographs of it, correct?
Objection, argumentative.
Rephrase the question.
Dr. Burgess, did you make any attempt to count the number of shots that were fired from the photographs that you were given and the coroner's report and the coroner's testimony?
I would object, Mr. She has, it's no
Counsel, what
foundation,
is,
no foundation for expert opinion by this witness on that point.
all right, objection sustained.
Do you have any expertise in examining gunshot wounds?
No,
Is that something that is not included in your crime scene analysis?
that is part of the forensic report that comes in.
You understand that the coroner testified and also substantiated in his report that Mrs. Menendez had 10 areas of gunshot wounds.
10 areas, right, and he could not determine how many shots had been fired.
That's correct, but she had 10 areas, and some of those areas contain more than one wound to her body, correct?
Yes,
For instance, the one that went across her right forearm and into her right upper arm was considered one area of wounding for purposes of his discussion, correct?
yes,
You're aware of the fact that there were 2 misses in the doors, correct?
that's correct.
You're aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez had 5 areas of gunshot wound.
Yes,
Are you familiar with the trajectory of the various wounds on Mr. Menendez?
Well, Your Honor, I have to object. You guys can here.
Overall.
You know what trajectory is, don't you?
yes,
That's the direction that the bullet or shotgun pellets travel.
that's correct.
Now, did you at any time try to evaluate how many wounds you thought and how many shots you thought were fired from looking at the crime scene?
No, I took what was written in the reports.
All
I
right,
did
and
not count per se. I looked at the autopsy report, looked at the coroner's report, looked at the police reports.
well, you know the number of rounds fired is an issue in this case, correct?
That's
I'm gonna
correct.
object, Your Honor, as a topic.
Overall. Overall.
And in spite of the fact that you are not trained as an expert in gunshot wounds, you have studied crime scenes for a number of years, correct?
Yes,
Did you ever make an attempt to evaluate using your own prior experience how many gunshots you thought had been fired?
no,
Sustained, the answer straight.
When the defendants went into the room, did you find it at all significant that there were only 2 misses?
Well, I'm gonna object to the question. If no testimony for the misses.
Okay, the question, objection then is objection, assumes facts, not evidence.
Exactly.
All right, rephrase the question, objection
Dr.
sustained.
Dr. Burgess, in your evaluation of the crime scene where you gave testimony in front of both juries, didn't you testify that there were 2 misses in the French doors?
I believe I said there were missed shots into the door. I didn't know whether those, I don't think I said as to how many shots had been expounded because pellets can clearly be expended from the bird shots. There's 27 in one and more than that in the bird. So my understanding from the firearm specialist is you cannot determine how many shots were fired.
In your evaluation and in your conclusion that this was a disorganized crime scene, didn't you testify that there were 2 misses?
Overall.
You did so testify.
Is that a question?
All right, that's in the form of a question. What is your answer?
I thought I said that there were 2 areas that had expended shell evidence. I'm not sure I said 2 specific shots. I
And so-
didn't mean to say that. I don't know. I don't think anybody can determine that, of how many shots were fired.
All right, so you didn't testify in your crime scene analysis that this was disorganized, that one of the things you considered were the 2 misses in the French doors. You didn't
I
say that, right?
did testify that this was disorganized. One of the reasons being there were multiple shots fired, a gunshot with a wide range of pellets. There were 2 areas that were outside of the range of the 2 victims.
And those were the 2 shots to the French doors, correct?
Those could be 2 shots to the French doors.
Well, what other
Would-
shots could you be referring to then? If it's not the
What-
French doors?
Rephrase the question.
What other shots are you referring to if it's not the 2 shots in the French doors? Are there other areas where there appear to be misses in the room?
I thought one went out into the tree out inside,
The tree was outside the French door.
right?
So that would be consistent with a pellet passing through the French door into the tree, correct?
Well, it could be. I don't think it's been determined what it was, but there certainly were pellets out in the tree.
Now, I believe you've indicated that this was a crime of high emotionality, correct?
Yes.
Did you,
Overall.
did you consider it interesting that in light of the defendant's testimony that the room was smoky and they couldn't see and that they were very upset that the parents were hit so many times?
No.
You didn't find that inconsistent with their version that they acted out of fear in a random shooting?
Well, that is consistent with acting out of fear in a random, that there's a wide range of shots that are fired. There's no specific targeting, no clear one shot, the wrong weapon, all of those kinds of factors go into my categorizing this as a disorganized crime scene.
Mrs. Menendez was shot in 10 areas on her body. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Menendez was shot 5 times. Correct?
Yes.
And you didn't consider it noteworthy that their state of mind allowed them to hit their target that many times? Did you consider that noteworthy? That in spite of the fact that they were in this automaton rage, that they hit their target that many times?
The point is that there were multiple shots that were fired at a time, indicates high emotionality, low thinking.
Now, at some point after the killing, the effects of this, the hormones and the fear response diminish, correct?
There is a period of time when that occurs.
After Mr. Menendez allegedly closed the door to the den on the night of the 20th, which was the cue that prompted this,
One of the cues.
one of the cues that prompted this, wasn't there sufficient time for them to cool down before they went in to shoot?
Rephrase the question.
Okay, you've indicated that after the shooting, but before they picked up the shotgun shells, they would have transformed out of this mental state that they were in, correct?
No, I don't think I said that. I said that there is there can be a lowering, but that is an important phase of this, is when they do go out into the foyer area and they are feeling exhausted. Certainly, Eric Menendez was feeling exhausted, and then came the next step of what to do. So that is what now becomes the post-crime behavior.
If Eric Menendez had felt exhausted after committing a premeditated crime, would that be inconsistent with him having premeditated? Do people who commit planned crimes get tired by committing their crimes?
Well, people that commit planned crimes that are organized are generally calm, collected, and cool, and so that it is not a lot of emotion that is surfacing. And generally, all of this would not be activated. The fear mechanism would not be activated.
When the defendants went to the police and when Eric Menendez went to the police and told him the story that he and his brother had agreed upon, was he still acting in this automatic state?
Well, the part of the offense behavior was over. By the time the police came, which would have been roughly several hours later, there was still quite a bit of shock and fright present, because that is in his statement.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
So the fact that he was able to tell the story to the police that he and his brother had agreed upon
Yes.
in no way changes your mind that he was still acting in some sort of state of fright?
I think it indicates he was in a state of fright, his statement.
Are you familiar with the testimony from Lyle Menendez that he and his brother returned to the house at sometime that morning, the morning of the 21st, because Lyle wanted to retrieve further evidence from his car?
Oh, okay. You've jumped ahead now to about what, 3 in the morning?
8:30 in the morning.
8:30 in the morning. Yes.
Would that be consistent with someone who has just suffered a terrible fright to have the presence of mind to remove evidence in front of the police?
It certainly speaks to his mind state of fear, yes.
Doesn't it show a great deal of coolness for someone to be able to go into a crime scene, recover evidence, and destroy it with a police officer standing right there?
Well, I think both defendants clearly state in their statement to the police that they were at the crime scene.
Don't you think returning to the car to remove evidence with a police officer standing by shows a great deal of coolness on the part of the person doing it?
No, I don't think I would ever make that jump and that leap, no.
But you would make the leap that this crime was committed out of fear, correct?
It's argumentative.
I'm going to give a hypothetical to you, Dr. Burgess. Two brothers have been psychologically manipulated and perhaps abused by their father for a number of years. In May of 1989, one of the brothers is threatened with being disowned by that father. In the summer of 1989, the other brother returns to the family home, having suffered a disastrous semester at a university which had previously expelled him for a year. When that son comes home, his parents are informed on 2 separate occasions that he's on disciplinary and academic probation.
Yes.
2 days before the parents are killed, one of the brothers has an uneventful tennis lesson at the family home. On that same day, the day of the uneventful tennis lesson, these 2 brothers travel 2 hours from Los Angeles to a gun store in San Diego, and using identification, which is not theirs, forge a signature, create an address, and purchase 2 shotguns. The day before the killings, they go on a trip with their parents, during which nothing eventful happens at all.
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to have to object that this hypothetical is not within the facts of this case. And it's improper.
The nature of your objection is not the proper one, but the court is going to sustain the objection in nature that it's an improper hypothetical, not on the basis of the nature of this objection, but just it's an improper hypothetical.
Dr. Burgess, you're familiar with the fact that the defendants made up you're familiar with their claim that they made up the alibi after the shooting. Is that correct?
I'm familiar with what they stated happened afterwards, yes.
Did you consider that at all remarkable in light of what you say they went through the week before the shooting, that they were able to think up that alibi after this traumatic event of shooting their parents in fear?
Well, that's an interpretation that I wouldn't necessarily make.
Well, what
But they
interpretation?
made it up.
What interpretation would you make of the fact that they say they thought of the alibi after the shooting? What interpretation do you give to that?
Well, they had, first of all, the state that they were in. If you want to take it as an alibi, as I think we've already gone over, that's hardly an alibi that's going to work. And it didn't work. I think that's the more important thing, is that it didn't work.
Dr. Burgess, do you know what psychobabble is?
Overruled.
Do you know what psychobabble
No, I
is?
don't.
I have nothing further.
All right, any redirect?
Do you know the prosecutor's trying to argue their case to witnesses, Dr. Burgess?
I think that's
All right, sustain. Your next question.
Yes, you believe Eric Menendez when he tells you he was molested by his father for 12 years, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And you believe Eric Menendez when he tells you that it was that molestation that ultimately led to the unraveling of this family?
Yes.
And do you believe that because you're getting paid $100 an hour by the taxpayers of the County of Los Angeles to be a witness in this case?
No, I do not.
Why do you believe him?
There are several reasons why I believe him. One, the statement that he gives regarding his abuse matches much of the criteria that I always use in evaluating statements. And second of all, which is probably equally important, is that the information that I have regarding the father, who is the named abuser in this situation, certainly has characteristics that very much fit in with the type of person that would do this.
All right. Now, when you talk about the type of person that would do this, I think we've indicated there's no set profile for an incest perpetrator.
That is correct.
When Eric Menendez told you the specific details, including things said, things not said, actions taken, of the 12 years of sexual molestation, did the actions and behaviors that he ascribed to his father fit other information you had about Jose Menendez?
Yes, it did.
Is that the pattern that you were referring to of consistency between how Jose Menendez treated people in other aspects of his life and how he operated as a child molester?
Sustained.
What was it that fit the pattern? You've testified that the information from Eric fit a pattern.
Yes, it fit the pattern that one sees generally that I've described in terms of access, et cetera, but it also contains the characteristics that would need to be present for the secrecy to be maintained, for the acts to be maintained, all of those features also.
When he described how his father behaved in the context of the sexual activity, was that consistent or inconsistent with information you had about the father's behavior in other aspects of his life?
Yes, it was consistent.
Now, you're aware of the fact that Eric Menendez testified for, I think, the better part of 10 days in this trial.
Yes,
And Mrs. Bazanich brought to you one fact involving confusion about where he had the conversation about purchasing a handgun. Is that right?
that,
Sustained as to the form of the question, and the answer is stricken.
You're aware that he testified for 10 days?
yes,
In your cross-examination just now, you remember Mrs. Bazanich bringing to your attention the testimony concerning where it was that he had a conversation on Friday that led him to learn there was a 2-week waiting period for the purchase of a handgun.
yes,
And you indicated that one explanation for Eric Menendez's confusion on that point, for his being wrong, which I believe he also testified to, did he not?
yes,
Was that he has a naming problem.
yes,
And did you see in other aspects of his testimony a similar naming problem?
yes,
With respect, for example, to the purchase by his mother of a rifle, did that piece of evidence indicate a naming problem?
yes, it did.
And with respect to what states various cities are in, did that indicate a naming problem?
Yes, it did.
Now, in your opinion, if someone is going to make up a story like that, does he have to name the place at all?
No, it does not.
Now, are you assuming in your analysis of the significance or lack of significance of that testimony that, in fact, he was at a different store than the Big Five?
Calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness. Objection sustained.
Well, Mrs. Bazanich asked you for your opinion of whether or not his testimony in that regard was significant.
Yes,
And you indicated it wasn't because you know he has a naming problem.
yes,
Does that mean that you assume he was at a different store?
no,
Overruled. The answer will stand.
Is there another analysis that you have applied to that information to explain the cognitive dissonance, if you will, between saying Big Five and there not being real handguns being sold? We
Yes.
assume, we've yet to hear that evidence at Big Five.
yes.
And what's the other analysis of that?
He could have been at that store and misunderstood these guns, and looked at one and assumed it was another one, not being familiar with guns.
And in your experience, you've had a great deal of experience, have you not, in understanding how people's memory works? In your role as an evaluator, as a therapist,
Yes,
do people have photographic memories for conversations occurring years before?
not necessarily.
well, do they tend to have line for line literal memories?
Not for years before, no.
Now, you have alluded to Eric Menendez's statements to the police on both August 21st and September 17th as having some kind of special significance to you?
Yes, I have.
And did they have significance with respect to Eric's tendency to tell the truth?
Yes, they did.
And would you explain to the jury? No, strike that. You heard Mrs. Bozanich ask Dr. Tyler, for example, if Eric lied to the police. Do you remember that?
Yes, I did.
In your opinion, on balance, in evaluating those two statements, did Eric Menendez lie to the police?
Sustained.
What is significant to you about the statements of August 21st and September 17th?
What is significant to me, more so in the September, because it's a longer interview, is that there was one misstatement made about seeing a Batman movie, but more likely than not, that not only were the statements true, but the statements placed him at the scene of the crime, and that some of the statements were indicators both of confession as well as guilt.
Now, when you're saying that the statement placed him at the scene of the crime, obviously he was at the scene of the crime and he and his brother called 911. Is that what you mean?
No, that's not what I mean.
What do you mean?
He was also at the death scene.
And are you saying that he's telling the police, I was there when my parents were killed?
Yes, I believe that.
How does he do that?
He does that because several of the statements speak to sensory stimulation and memory. And specifically by that, I mean the smelling of the smoke that does come through both on the first interview. He says he smelled smoke. Later in the interview, a few pages later, he says that something about being 4 hours before. So clearly, being able to smell smoke is something that he would have had to have been there to have smelled.
Okay. So if I understand you, you say he is actually giving them these clues that he's there.
Yes, he is.
And what follow-up questions do the officers ask in August and September to his revelation that he both saw and smelled smoke?
Right, as to the objection, it's irrelevant, objection sustained.
Well, is there any further discussion? Do the police ask?
Sustained.
As a crime scene evaluator, if the suspect told you that he was not at the scene of the crime, he had arrived 2 hours after the shooting, and yet he smelled smoke and saw smoke, as a person who's evaluating crime scenes, would that be of significance to you?
Sustained.
I'd like to approach on this issue, Your Honor.
There's no need. She has no expertise in gunshots or use of firearms. She said that. Objection
I
sustained.
don't believe that's
Objection
true.
sustained.
Well, that's not the issue upon which I want to approach.
It would seem to be, so objection
No, it
sustained.
isn't.
Go ahead.
You're
Nothing's
reading
wrong
my
with something
mind
else.
now as well.
I try.
Such talent.
Go ahead and ask your next question.
You understood that the implication of Mrs. Bozanich's statements was that Eric Menendez was lying to you, did you not?
Yes.
You understood from her recitation of other questions that she is implying that he is a liar.
Overall.
In talking to the police in this case,
Yes.
do you find instances where he is virtually confessing?
Sustained, the answer is true.
Do you find instances where he is telling the police the truth about family, the same truth that he told you?
Sustained.
Did he tell you the truth that he killed his parents and how it happened? Your Honor, I would like to approach.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
about to resume. Just a point of reference, ladies and gentlemen, we had anticipated, well, let me back up. The lawyers told me that they would finish this examination this morning, and we're still at it this afternoon. So it's taking quite a bit longer than anticipated, and it's unfortunate because we had the other jury come in today, and we had expected to get to them this morning, and we're still plugging away at this afternoon. So they're waiting in the wings. So hopefully we'll finish this fairly quickly so that we can get on with the next phase of the trial. And once we finish with this witness, I'll give you a little more information about the scheduling and as to your situation. All right, you may continue your examination.
Okay, would you relate to us which things that Eric Menendez said to the police on the 17th were significant in your evaluation of him?
Yes. On September 17th, let me just start reading.
Just tell us what was significant. If you need to rely, that's the statement itself that you've marked?
Yes.
Okay, go right ahead then.
Okay, on page 8, it's a pair of jeans I have like lumps here, and then he says a hole comes out here, back here, and a hole comes out back here, almost like a bullet hole or something.
And what's significant about us telling the police that he has jeans that may have a bullet hole in them?
This is the first spontaneous statement he's made in 8 pages, and he goes on and explains it, and he really wants to show the police officer these jeans.
Objection sustained. That portion of the answer is stricken.
Does he tell the police he wants to show them the jeans?
Yes, he does.
Okay. What's the next significant thing?
Okay, the next significant point is where he talks about there was a lot of smoke in the room.
Right.
And the next is, from what I remember, I thought about it 3 million times in my mind. It wasn't loud. Did you notice the TV? And then he goes into the
Okay.
point about the TV.
Let me point out to Dr. Burgess, you don't have to read.
Just to clarify, which statement is this? The one the night of the shooting
No, this is September 17th.
in New Jersey?
The New
New
Jersey
Jersey.
interview.
Dr.
Right.
Burgess, you don't have to read the statement. You can
Okay.
summarize the particular piece of it that you're relying on. Now, this particular piece that you just talked about, where he said he's thought about it 3 million times, does that have any, and he had talked about the smoke in the room, does that have any significance to you?
Yes, it does.
And what does that tell you?
It's a recurring intrusive thought that is specifically about what he saw.
Okay, and would you expect that in recurring intrusive thought about what he saw if this was a cool, calculated, planned homicide for money?
Sustained.
Is that significant in your conclusion? The prosecution's just been probing that this was a crime of high emotionality and low thinking.
Yes,
Why?
because if he had high thinking, low emotionality, this would not be something that would be coming into his mind. It would have been done. If it was a plan, it would have been done, it would have been over with, and it wouldn't have been thought about 3 million times in a 3-week period.
Are you finding in that statement that there is a traumatic effect of this incident on Eric?
Yes.
And would you expect a crime that was planned for the purpose of money to have a traumatic effect?
Overruled.
No, I did not expect that.
What is the next indication in that statement or the next statement by Eric Menendez in that statement that you found significant?
Okay, on the same page as I smell the smoke every day.
And is that like the previous statement?
Yes, but he repeats it, he didn't have to.
Okay.
Again, just going on to the next page, he now gives a description. It was like a slow haze. The room was like dark yellow. It was like a full slick haze. And sitting from there, what I remembered, so he goes now into what he sees as well as what he smells.
Okay. And what's the significance of his now telling the police this 3 times that he saw the smoke and he saw the haze?
He is really telling what's in his mind. I mean, this is his telling what's in his mind.
Okay.
So, and this says that he is right back at that crime scene.
And do you think this is part of the story that he and his brother were supposed to tell the police?
Sustained.
So you had any, well, Mrs. Bozanich asked you about his ability to tell this story that he and his brother had decided to tell the police after the crime. Remember
Yes.
that?
Yes,
Do you
I
have any indication that as part of the story, they were going to tell the police that they saw smoke and smelled smoke?
No.
Is that the kind of pre-planned alibi that you're familiar with organized killers?
No.
Do organized killers try to give away the fact that they've been at the scene of the crime at the time of death?
Sustained.
Based on your research in the literature, do organized killers give away the fact that they're present at the time of death?
Sustained.
You've talked about, just to seg you off here for a second, talked about this notion that what Eric and Lyle Menendez told the police about going to the movies and then going to meet somebody in Santa Monica did not fit your definition of an alibi.
Yes.
Did any part of that story, okay, that they told, that we went to the movies and we went to Santa Monica, actually cover them for the time of the shooting?
Rephrase the question.
Yes. What is an alibi?
An alibi is something that you give so that it covers you for a period of time when something happened.
It means you're someplace else.
Someplace else, yes.
Okay. And it's a way to establish, is it not, that you're someplace else?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are you aware of the fact that in this state they don't lock the doors to movie theaters?
Well, the question is she aware of that fact?
I'm not.
Well, have you ever been in a movie theater where you've been locked in?
No.
Is it your understanding and belief that if you go into a movie theater, even in Los Angeles, you can leave?
You can leave. Okay.
And is it your notion of an alibi to tell the police that you were at some place to meet somebody when you didn't meet the person?
Right. That doesn't make sense.
And when the person will know that you weren't there at the time that the shooting occurred?
Yes.
Is that your idea of an alibi?
No, that's not my idea of an alibi.
Now, is it necessary in order to create an alibi that you have to create a ruckus in a residential neighborhood with two shotguns?
No.
And Mrs. Bozanich suggested in her question that they used shotguns to make a lot of noise.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you with respect to creating an alibi?
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Is that something that you believe is preparatory to creating an alibi?
No.
Is that preparatory to getting caught red-handed?
Sustained.
Is that the kind of activity that you've categorized as a disorganized crime scene with a high risk of detection?
Yes.
Now, you have indicated that in making your assessment or evaluation of Eric Menendez and in assessing his credibility, whether you believe what he's telling you, you considered the fact that he's in jail faced with a very serious crime.
Yes,
correct?
I did.
Is it your opinion that because a person is in jail, he could not have been sexually molested by the person he killed?
No.
Is it your opinion that there is usually a reason or a cause for homicide?
Yes.
Is it your opinion in this case that the sexual molestation of Eric Menendez was an originating cause for these homicides?
Yes, it is.
You were asked whether or not all secretive families are families in which incest or abuse is going on.
Yes,
And I believe you said no.
that's correct.
Are most, however, incestuous and abusive families secretive?
Yes, they are.
Is secrets the way that abuse continues?
Yes, it is.
And did you find in examining all the information in this case that this was a highly secretive family?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, can we take that break because I have to make that phone call?
How much longer do you have?
I have about 20, 25 minutes.
And you committed to that phone call at this hour?
I'm committed to the phone call, yes, but not to what the phone call wants.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, only 5 minutes. Going here. So at 5 minutes after the hour, we'll continue. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. 5 after 3 is when we return.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
We have all the jurors back. You may continue your redirect examination, rather.
Thank you, Your Honor. Concerning the interview that Eric Menendez had with the police on September 17th, was there a passage in that interview that you recall when Eric was talking about when he was little?
Yes.
And was there something significant to you about that passage in that statement?
Yes.
What was he, without reading it, basically, what was he telling the police?
He essentially talked about when he was younger and little and he used to love everything, but as getting older, life is colder.
And did that suggest something to you about what was going on in his state of his mind at that time?
Yes.
What was that?
What was going on in his mind had to do with reflections on what his life had been. It's a pretty clear statement of that.
Is it also a reflection of that he has hurt someone?
Yes, that certainly is present too.
Do you recall his asking Detective Zoller 2 questions during the course of that interview? The first one being, would the police have shot me if I came out with a gun?
Yes.
And was that a significant statement to you concerning whether he's, part of him at least, is telling the truth?
Yes.
And do you recall his also asking Detective Zoller whether or not the police had figured out that it was someone that they, meaning his parents, knew?
Yes, he did say that.
And does that bear on the same issue?
Yes, that bears on the total interview.
Do you recall his telling the police in that statement about his mother having bought a gun and about arguments in the family?
Yes.
Do you recall his telling Detective Zoller in that statement that he wanted to get away from his father, that he wanted to go to college and to live at the dorms?
Yes, that is in the statement.
Now, is there anything that he says in that, either the statement of August 21st or the statement of September 17th, where he is suggesting that any other people, bodies, or entities may be responsible for the killing of his parents? Does he say anything about anybody else being involved?
No, he does not.
Does he direct the police to look into any other areas of his parents' lives?
Sustained.
Are there any words in that statement that tell them, look at his business, it might be the mob, it must have been a burglary, anything like that?
No, that is not present in the statement.
Now, you indicated that the things that you looked to in evaluating Eric's credibility had to do with the context of the statement, the details that he gave, and how those details fit into your wide understanding of root patterns of child molestation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was there also anything about, I think you said on cross-examination, you also looked at what you called affect.
Yes.
What is affect?
Affect is the emotional response that you can see, sometimes called demeanor, but it is when you ask a question, does the person smile, laugh, cry, frown? Can you read, if you will, an emotion?
And in evaluating a person who has made a statement to you about child abuse, are there certain emotional responses that you anticipate or expect if the person is being truthful?
Yes, you generally expect some type of affect or emotion.
Now, when you were interviewing Eric Menendez in the jail for these 50 hours, was that a situation in which he was under any extraordinary stress?
Sustained.
In your opinion, was the situation, you were creating the atmosphere along with him, were you not?
Yes.
And were you trying to create an atmosphere of extreme stress?
No.
Were you trying to create a different kind of atmosphere?
Yes, I was.
And why were you doing that?
I was trying to create as comfortable an atmosphere as possible so that he would be able to tell me what had happened to him, regardless of what the question was, with as much, fewer defenses than people usually use defenses, to be able to be genuine and emotive, be able to express his emotions.
And was he genuine, emotive, and able to express his emotions during those 50 hours of interview?
Sustained, rephrase the question.
Did you find his affect during those 50 hours of interview to be appropriate to what he was telling you?
Yes, I did.
And why was it appropriate?
Because depending on what he was talking about, he was able to show a fairly good range of emotion, and it was matched the type of content he was discussing.
And did you think that he was acting?
No, I did not.
What significance do you place, if any, on the fact that as a high school student, he took a drama class?
I don't place any significance on that.
Now, you have testified that, in your opinion, at the time of the shooting of his parents, Eric Menendez was in a state of extreme fear and operating on the body's survival mechanisms.
Yes.
Is that a mental state?
No, it is not.
What is it?
That is a neurobiological state. It is a normal adaptive response that the body gives forth when placed in a dangerous situation.
And in your analysis of the few days preceding the shootings, were there varying levels of fear that, in your opinion, Eric Menendez was experiencing?
Yes, there were.
And over the course of those days, at different times, was he in different phases of the fear response?
Yes, he was.
And during the actual shootings, was he in that second phase that you've talked about?
Yes, he was.
And is there then a third phase that I think you described he was in right after, during the foyer?
Yes, there was.
Now, Mrs. Bazanich has asked you about the Saturday night incident. And I think you indicated that was a situation in which he neither fought nor fled.
That's right.
What state was he in?
Well, one of the states was a freezing state. He was positioned, but not acting and not retreating.
And did that bear at all in the fact that he did not get up, as Mrs. Bazanich had suggested, and unlock the door and allow his father in so that he could then shoot him? Did that have any significance to you on his attitude towards his father?
Yes.
And what significance did it have?
The significance is he did not want to shoot his father.
Now, you were asked a question about the sexual preferences, if you will, of Mr. Menendez. In every incest family where the incest perpetrator is a natural parent,
Yes.
okay, didn't that natural parent have to have sex with an adult member of the opposite sex in order to have a child to molest?
Generally, yes.
And there are, of course, well-documented cases, are there not, of father-son incest?
Yes, there are.
And those fathers obviously had to have sex with a female to produce that son.
That is correct.
So that doesn't tell you anything about sexual preference, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you if you had ever contacted the prosecution to see if they had any information that you hadn't already been provided with. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You're aware of the fact, are you not, that the prosecution has your report?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And you're aware, are you not, that for months the prosecution has had your curriculum vitae?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Did they ever contact you?
No, they did not.
Did you consider in your evaluation of the credibility of the information that Eric Menendez was giving you the fact that during his testimony, none of his evidence concerning sexual molestation was impeached?
That's correct. I understand that.
Now, concerning the issue of the expectation that Eric Menendez had about going to UCLA, okay?
Yes,
Mrs. Bozanich showed you a report from a witness who has not yet testified in this case. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Are you aware of other reports from other witnesses who indicated that it was Mrs. Menendez who wanted Eric to go to Berkeley and Mr. Menendez who insisted he go to UCLA?
That was my understanding.
Now, I think you testified at one point that over the course of those few days before the shooting, there was sort of a gradual increase or heightening in the fear level.
That is correct.
In your opinion, from Tuesday night, when Lyle Menendez indicated that he would talk to Dad, if you will, about the molestation of Eric, through Sunday night, was there a constantly increasing level of fear?
Yes, there was.
And were there moments when that new level would abate somewhat?
Yes, there were.
And then would something else happen that would raise it to yet another level?
Yes, that is correct.
And is that why you talk about the events of Sunday night being cumulative?
Yes, it is.
When you were analyzing all the information that you had, and particularly the information, well, strike that. I think you indicated that in response to a question from Mrs. Bazanich concerning those 5 critical factors in those days,
Yes.
that you didn't just analyze, you didn't just make render an opinion on what Eric was feeling, if you will, at the time of the shootings based on those 5 days, but on everything else you had looked at.
That is correct.
And what did you mean by that?
What I meant by that was I went through all of the materials that had come in from the prosecution side, all of the interviews that I could have available, especially the police interview, any kinds of reports that were available.
And when you're talking about the consistency of the behavior of
Yes.
Eric Menendez during those last few days, are you viewing that through the prism, if you will, of his lifelong relationship with his parents?
Yes, I am.
Now, what was your understanding, if any, concerning when the particular bed that Eric had moved from the Beverly Hills house to his house was purchased?
I don't know when it was purchased.
So you don't know how long he had owned that?
No, I
before he
don't.
moved? Do you believe in, I mean, in your professional opinion, you have talked about children who are the victims of abuse developing coping mechanisms, rescue fantasy, other mechanisms, correct?
Yes.
Is it common that among these children that there is a point, particularly in adolescent, when for whatever reason they just cannot take it anymore?
Yes.
And did you see such a point being reached in Eric Menendez's life?
Yes.
And what was that point?
The point was certainly at the point that he was preparing to get out on his own and go to school, go to college.
And so he had had a mechanism to get him to that point.
Yes, he had.
And when that mechanism failed, what did he have?
When that mechanism failed, he was completely all of his hopes and all of his wishes were now collapsed. And that would now require a rethinking or trying to find some new way of coping.
And given the history of this family and its interactions, was his turning to his brother a logical or an appropriate or a predictable thing that he would do under those circumstances? How do you understand his turning to his brother at that time?
I saw this as a logical choice for him, someone he found in the family. He had always idolized his older brother. There certainly has been testimony about how much he would write about his brother. And this was a very solid bond that he now was working on to get him out of that situation and to move forward.
And from the perspective of how he was raised in this family, was it an irrational act for Eric Menendez to rely on his older brother?
No.
Sustained, the answer stricken.
Was it an understandable act given the history of this family?
Sustained.
Did he have, in your opinion, based on everything you know, anyone else that it would have been logical for him to turn to?
Overruled.
No.
Now, you were asked by Mrs. Bazanich about Dr. Oziel and this waiver that Mrs. Bazanich mentioned.
Yes.
You recall Dr. Oziel himself admitting that there were other waivers besides the one that was admitted into evidence.
Yes, I remember that.
And did you, I think you testified that you could understand a child molester allowing his child to go to a psychologist, particularly in the context where there's going to be waivers of confidentiality. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You had talked about this pattern of molestation and incest, particularly behaviors in families, of one where efforts are made to make sure the child keeps the secret.
Yes.
As the child gets older, do the strategies usually change?
Overruled.
Yes.
And why is that?
Because as the child develops, there are going to be additional aspects that come into being, and so that there can be a remodification of some of the coping. What worked younger may not work when they're older.
Okay, I'm talking about it, though, from the perspective of the perpetrator, if you will. If a child has lived with a secret, and as far as the perpetrator knows, kept the secret for year in and year out, and is now an adolescent, okay?
Yes.
Is it more likely or less likely that that child is now trained to keep the secret?
Oh, yes, the child will keep the secret, yes.
So would there be less anxiety about the child revealing the secret at that point?
Yes.
Sustained, the answer stricken.
Do you think Jose Menendez, well, do you think any child molester in an incest family would be as concerned about a child who had kept a secret for 10 years versus one who had not?
Sustained.
Did you see, based on everything you knew about this family, any particular risk to Jose Menendez that the secret was going to be revealed by sending Eric Menendez to a Dr. Oziel who would go along with a non-confidential therapy of an adolescent?
Sustained.
Would you ever take an adolescent into therapy where you suspected, or you had reason to suspect abuse, and agree to share that therapy with a parent?
Sustained.
Is that appropriate practice?
Sustained. Sustained.
Why
on to
didn't
something
you?
else.
Yeah, okay. You indicated you didn't contact Dr. Oziel.
Correct.
Did you have a lot of material concerning Dr. Oziel's relationships with a number of different people besides Mr. Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And did you read all that material?
Yes, I did.
And you said that you believed that the notes that you had of Dr. Oziel's were not original notes, but reconstructed from memory. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are those notes upon which you, as a professional, would ever rely?
No, they're not.
Would you rely on the opinion of Dr. Oziel based on everything you know about him?
No, I would not.
I have nothing further on.
Any recross?
I'm going to object to that. That is absolutely untrue and
Right.
an improper
That's-
question.
Let me hear the question again, please.
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor.
All right,
And I would like to approach on this issue because that is simply a mistake with that.
all right. Again, you're arguing the matter before you do approach, which is obviates the need to approach. So the request is denied, the question is withdrawn. You may ask another question.
Dr. Burgess, do you understand that your report was not made available to prosecution until shortly before you took the witness stand?
The object is an improper question, Your Honor, given the rules of
Objection overruled.
115.
Objection overruled. You asked the question. Now she's entitled to go into the same area. Objection overruled.
I just want to make.
Objection overruled.
Can I just make a record?
Say you're citing Proposition 115. Objection overruled.
Exactly.
Okay.
Do you remember the question?
Yes. My understanding is my report was made available before my testimony. I don't know precisely how long, but I know it was made available before I testified.
Within 2 days before you testified.
Objection misstates the fact.
Right, it's a question. The answer is she doesn't know.
And during the period of time before your name was made available, was it your understanding that you could contact the prosecution and discuss your findings as to Eric Menendez?
One of the questions made, Your Honor, with respect to her name being made available.
All right, just rephrase the question.
Dr. Burgess, were you at liberty to discuss your findings with the prosecution prior to your report being made available to the prosecution?
I'm not aware of how that would work. I really don't know. I did not contact prosecution, as I've already said.
You had no discussion with the prosecution prior to testifying about the content of your findings as to Eric Menendez, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You're excused. And let me see counsel at the sidebar here. In discussing the matter with the lawyers, they indicate that the next two witnesses who are to testify will be before the gold jury and not you folks. And the way things have gone and the way time estimates have been, regardless of what they say, it seems that we won't need you for the balance of the week. This is Wednesday, and these other two witnesses probably would take the rest of the week to finish. There's a problem with one of the gold jurors Friday afternoon. So the way things look now, we won't be able to get back to you until Monday at 9 o'clock. But before I let you go, let me say a few things to you and ask a few things of you. First of all, it's very important that you not be concerned with and not speculate about or think about what is going on in the courtroom when you're not in it, when there's testimony being offered in relationship to the other defendant. It only concerns his case and is of no concern to you, and you should not be concerned about it. You have to make your decision based only on the evidence you see in the courtroom while you're in the courtroom and my instructions on the law. Secondly, I haven't asked this for a while, and it's important that I continue to do so. The inquiry has to do with whether you've been exposed to anything about this case in any form whatsoever outside of the courtroom. Some of you have already told me of things, and I've discussed those with you. I received 1 or 2 notes that I've shown to counsel that have given me some information and didn't require any follow-up discussion. But other than what you've already told me in either writing or orally here in the courtroom, has anyone been exposed to anything else about this case outside of the courtroom in any form whatsoever? All right. Okay. And we all looked over the same spot, but all right. There's no response over there. All right. One additional thing, I did get a note, and I quite honestly, I don't know which jury sent it to me. It's an anonymous note, and it has a concern expressed in it, which is a legitimate one. And it's basically a concern that during the course of the trial, there might be some comments or remarks made in the jury box by one juror or another that is distracting, even if it's not about the case particularly. It could be some observation in general about things or whatever, and that creates a distraction for the people around the person making the comments. So I don't know if this jury generated that note or the other jury. It doesn't really matter, but it's a legitimate concern, and it's one that you should keep in mind, that during the course of the trial, as I've said to you, you must not discuss this case with anyone, which means you must not discuss it with anyone outside of the courtroom, and you must not discuss it with your fellow jurors, whether you're in the courtroom or in the jury room or anywhere else. You have to wait until the evidence has all been presented, and when you go into the jury room to decide the case, which only happens after all the arguments of the lawyers are given to the jury and my instructions on the law, and then the 12 jurors go into the jury room and then discuss it. And that's by law the only time you're permitted to discuss the case until the case is completed. So please keep that in mind as well during the course of the trial. All right, I'll remind you again not to discuss the case with anyone, and don't form any final opinions about it. Don't permit yourselves to be exposed to anything about this case outside of the courtroom, and we'll see you all back here Monday at 9 o'clock.